Chapter 1. The Density of Silence. Harry sat at his desk, a wooden table pressed close to the window of the old, sagging house. Morning entered the room as a thin strand of light, stretching across the tabletop, sliding past the edge of a sheet of paper, brushing the rim of a glass, then stopping. It went no farther. Harry's face lay outside that strip of light, as though the sun had learned, over time, to avoid that place. His body leaned forward, stretched along the desk. A slow breath slipped from his chest, carrying with it the faintest movement of fingers resting loosely on the wood. His gaze remained fixed beyond the window, on the tree before the house, swaying just enough to register. The early wind was mild, only enough to stir the leaves and draw out a few scattered bird calls that surfaced, then dissolved. Inside, an old fan turned slowly, its steady creak failing to break the silence, only sharpening it. The house carried the scent of aged pine, no longer sharp, only a thin residue lingering in the air. Harry leaned back in his chair, letting his weight sink. On the wall, framed photographs hung close together, dark wooden frames slightly crooked, untouched. Time within those images seemed to have stopped there, releasing a muted warmth. Medals hung neatly, reflecting no light. On the shelf, books stood in careful rows, their spines dulled by years. In the corner, painting tools lay still, arranged with care, as though keeping order was the last remaining task. Harry stood. His footsteps were so light they seemed not to touch the house at all. In the kitchen, he took mocha and robusta beans, half of each, and poured them into the grinder. When the aroma rose, he paused, lifting the blend to his nose. The scent met his breath and spread slowly through his chest, warm and familiar, like something that had once belonged to mornings. He placed the grounds into the filter, fitted it into the machine, and poured exactly one shot of water, neither rushed nor delayed. Coffee dripped out, one drop at a time. In the glass cup, the dark liquid cobbed what little light there was. A thin veil of steam rose slowly, filling the room with a cautious kind of life. Harry poured the coffee into a cup already holding cool water. An Americano took shape, plain, unadorned. He took a packet of packaged bread and carried everything out to the small table in the garden. The garden was unchanged, rose bushes planted in straight, orderly lines, the soil cleared, dry leaves gathered early. The scent of earth mingled with coffee, spreading through the air without competing. Harry sat and set the cup before him. The chair beside him was empty. He looked at it longer than necessary. The chair was nothing unusual, old, simple, placed exactly where it belonged, yet the silence around it was denser than the rest of the yard. Harry smiled faintly, as if out of a habit learned long ago, then returned to his coffee. He took a sip. Morning continued its slow, even passage, leaving the chair there, still empty, still silent, still present as something no longer needing a name. Time passed, not measured by clocks, but by the length of Harry's presence in the garden chair. He leaned back, letting his body sink into the space. The breeze brushed his long, unkempt hair, loosening a few strands that fell to cover his closed eyes. His fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the armrest. A familiar volume rested lightly on his chest. Understanding the Heart. No page was turned. The day drifted on. When the sun withdrew and darkness began to fill the garden, Harry finally stood. He changed clothes, moving gently, as if afraid to disturb the afternoon that had just left. The path from home to work crossed 3 streets, neither short nor long. On either side stood familiar houses, yellow light spilling from windows. The city was not yet loud, not yet asleep, only waiting. At the bar, Harry greeted his co-workers with a nod. He put on soft music, just enough to fill the gaps. Behind the counter, he wiped each glass, each corner, returning everything to its proper place. Selina approached, tilting her head as she studied him. "You're like this again today," she said, half joking. "You look terribly dull." Harry did not answer. He continued working, slow and steady. The night deepened, the bar grew warm, dense, laughter spilled from the tables. Harry poured whiskey and coke for customers. The sharp scent of alcohol rose, recalling the pinewood air of the old house. Guests leaned close in conversation. Servers laughed behind the counter. Harry remained there, part of the bar, yet never quite belonging to it. His shift ended at 3 in the morning. The city was nearly empty. Harry walked the familiar streets home. He did not turn on the lights right away. In the garden, he tidied and trimmed the plants under the thinning darkness, not quite morning, but no longer night. He wrote a few short lines in his journal. Then he brewed another cup of coffee. By the time warmth spread through his hands, the sky had lightened slightly. Gray arrived then. No knock. He stood at the edge of the garden, setting down bags of fertilizer and packets of seeds. It was not an hour for delivering seeds, but Gray did so anyway, as if following a habit that required no explanation. Harry glanced over. Leave them there. Nothing more was said. Harry lay back in the familiar chair, letting what little shade remained cover him. Gray stood still for a moment. Early light touched the chair beside Harry, the empty one, making it stand out more clearly than the rest of the garden. Gray looked at the chair. Then he laughed, quietly. Harry did not watch him go. He lay there, unmoving, until the light spread just a little farther. Chapter 2. 2 cents. Another morning began with Harry lying on the familiar chair on the veranda. His back rested against the worn wooden frame, where old grain lines had been pressed deep by years. His body lay loose, holding no distinct posture, as though he had been there for a very long time already. The breeze passed through, light enough to set the air in motion, to brush the leaves around the garden, yet it avoided him. The morning light behaved the same way. It stopped somewhere along the edge of the yard, caught on the grass, on the rim of the fence, but did not reach the place where he lay. This patch of shade seemed accustomed to Harry's presence, holding him as part of itself. Harry was not asleep. A slow breath lifted his chest and let it fall again. His fingers hung slack beside the armrest, tapping softly in an unsteady rhythm, sometimes even, sometimes breaking, as if he were counting something he himself no longer remembered. He looked up toward the veranda roof. Wooden beams ran parallel, forming quiet lines, their shadows layered one over another. His eyes followed those bands of shade, unhurried, never stopping. A dry leaf loosened from its branch, turned lightly in the air, then fell onto the green grass that had been neatly trimmed the day before. Birdsong sounded thin and scattered, no calling, no competition, appearing only to fade away. The wind chime hanging at the corner of the veranda stirred faintly. The sound it left in the air was so slight it could have been ignored. Yet Harry heard it. It was a sound that had lived here a long time, repeating itself every day, unchanged. The morning passed like this. There was no clear sign to mark what was early and what was late. Time was not measured by clocks but by the length of Harry's presence on the chair. He lay there, letting his body sink into the space. The breeze continued to pass through his long, unkempt hair, loosening a few strands that fell onto his forehead, covering his half-closed eyes. A familiar book rested lightly on his chest, its cover worn, Understanding the Heart. No page was turned, the words inside remained, but today they did not need to be read. By midday, the light changed its tone. The shadows of the trees shifted very slowly. Harry remained where he was. At times he opened his eyes, looked up at the sky broken into segments by the veranda roof, then closed them again. His task in this long day was simple: to be there and allow everything to happen without interference. Afternoon arrived almost without announcement. The space changed a little, the light softened, the breeze cooled slightly. When the sun began to sink behind distant rooftops, Harry finally stood. His movements were gentle and slow, as though he did not wish to disturb what had just passed. He changed clothes, straightened his collar, retied his shoelaces. Every motion was familiar. The road from home to work crossed 3 streets, neither short nor long. On both sides stood familiar houses, yellow light beginning to spill from their windows. The faint scent of dinner drifted through the air, warm food and voices reaching out from behind half-closed doors. The city was not yet noisy, not yet asleep. It was simply waiting for night to fully begin. Harry stopped by the supermarket to buy a few more groceries. He pushed the cart through narrow aisles, chose the usual items without lingering. Each movement unfolded quickly and cleanly, as if his body had memorized the order of every task. When he left, the bag in his hand was light. At the bar, yellow lights came on, enclosing the space. Inside, the air was warmer, denser. Harry greeted his co-workers with a brief nod. He put on soft music, sound that did not claim the room, only filled the gaps. Behind the counter, he began preparing everything. A dried pineapple was set on the bar. Harry took a knife and worked at it little by little. The cuts were slow and precise. He carved a narrow opening into the fruit, just wide enough to hold a candle. When he lit it, the small flame trembled, illuminating the rough skin. The scent of pineapple spread, rich and warm. It quickly merged with the air, clung to wood, to fabric, to the conversations unfolding nearby. A fragrance made to keep people staying, to make the night gentler than necessary. The owner, Anna, leaned against the counter and watched him for a while before speaking. Her voice was not sharp, but carried a familiar weariness. "You've been like this for a year now, Harry." "Yes." "And how long do you plan to keep going like this?" "Yes." "You know, every conversation with you is just yes and yes." "Yes." Anna exhaled and shook her head lightly. "Talking to you is exhausting." "Fine, do as you like." Harry did not answer. He continued his work. The scent of pineapple and alcohol settled over the space. Customers arrived, stood talking, laughing. He poured whiskey mixed with coke, his movements steady and exact. The sharp smell of liquor rose, mingling with the pineapple, briefly recalling the scent of pine wood around the old house. A memory surfaced, then disappeared. The night deepened, the bar grew louder, then quiet again. When the shift ended, the clock read 3 in the morning. The city was nearly empty. Harry left the bar, the scent of pineapple still clinging to his clothes. Outside, the air was cooler, thinner. He walked home beneath a muted light, not night, but not yet morning. When he arrived, he did not turn on the lights right away. He went out into the garden and began to tidy. The ground beneath his feet was damp and cool. As he bent down, the smell of soil rose deep, heavy, and real. It was nothing like the scent he carried from the bar. The earth clung to his hands, lodged beneath his nails, rose with his breath. Harry took out a packet of rose seeds. He dug small holes along the fence, placed each seed inside, then covered it with soil. Every movement was clear, unhurried. The smell of damp earth spread upward, slowly overtaking the remaining trace of pineapple, as though the garden were gently drawing him back toward itself. He stood there for a long time, looking at the strip of ground he had just planted. The sky began to pale. Early light touched the grass, the fence, then the chair on the veranda. 2 scents lingered, one from the night just closed, one from the dawn beginning to open. Harry chose neither. He simply stood between them. When the light spread a little farther, the garden returned to silence. And the new day began, slowly, like every other day. Chapter 3: The Sprouts. One morning not long after, the day began again on the old chair. Harry lay stretched out as he always did, his back resting against the wooden frame darkened by years. The chair stood beneath the veranda roof, where light usually stopped before reaching him. The early breeze moved through the garden, carrying the scent of young grass and the last coolness of night. But when it reached Harry, it softened, as if unwilling to disturb the stillness that had long settled there. He was not asleep. A slow breath lifted his chest, then let it fall. His fingers hung loose on the armrest, tapping lightly against the wood. Not a steady rhythm, not entirely unconscious either, just a small motion, enough to affirm that he was present. The sky was brighter than on previous mornings. This was no longer the tentative light of dawn, but a morning truly opening. Even so, the light continued to avoid Harry, stopping at the edge of the yard, on the neatly trimmed grass, on the base of the old mailbox standing by the fence. Gray arrived later than usual. When he appeared at the end of the path, the shadows had shortened and the air carried a faint warmth. Gray walked slowly, as though careful not to break the garden's quiet. Beside him was a small girl, about 5 years old, Lily. She entered the garden with an entirely different energy. Her smile was wide and bright, unguarded, without need of reason. Naturally curly black hair lifted around her small face. Her eyes shone, opened wide, reflecting everything before her as if the world were being introduced to her for the first time. Lily stopped when she noticed Harry. The old chair. The man stretched out, motionless, in the shade. She tilted her head and studied him for a long moment. There was no fear in her gaze, no excessive curiosity, only a serious effort to understand. "What are you doing?" Lily asked. Her voice was high and clear, cutting gently through the quiet. Harry opened his eyes. He looked at the girl. His gaze lingered long enough to show that he had heard her question. But he did not answer at once. "Can't you see the sun?" Lily continued. "It's up already." Harry gave a soft, indistinct sound, barely more than a breath straying from his throat. Lily did not wait for a reply. She stepped closer, placed her hand on the chair's arm, felt the cool surface of the wood, then climbed onto the chair beside him. Her legs swung in the air, the heels of her shoes tapping lightly together. "My mom says you had to go outside in the morning," Lily said, very seriously. "You had to breathe, you had to let the sun touch your face." Harry said nothing. He turned his head just slightly, allowing a thin strip of light to touch his cheek. Just a little, then he stopped. Lily kept talking. She spoke of small things, one after another, without pausing, about how mornings smelled different from evenings, about how morning wind messed up your hair in a nicer way, about how if you stood still too long, trees might think you were no longer there. Harry listened. Sometimes he nodded faintly. Sometimes he offered a low sound of acknowledgement, just enough response for Lily to know she was not speaking alone. The conversation went on. No one counted the time. Gray stood at the edge of the garden, not intervening. He watched quietly, as though his presence existed only to ensure that everything remained safe. Then Lily jumped down from the chair. She ran toward the fence, where the old mailbox stood alone. Her steps were quick and light. Only seconds passed before a cry rang out, high and sudden, breaking the long-held stillness. "Uncle!" Harry sat up. The movement was slow, but more decisive than before. He walked toward Lily. She stood crouched near the ground, pointing at a spot beside the base of the mailbox. There, among the damp soil and thin blades of grass, several small sprouts had pushed their way up. They did not resemble the plants usually found in this garden. Their stems were slender but not weak, standing upright with a strange firmness. The young leaves were neither fully green nor yellowed, but held a shade difficult to name, as though the light had not yet decided how to reflect them. Their shapes followed no familiar pattern of any plant Harry had ever grown. "What kind of plant is this?" Lily asked. "It's so strange." Harry stood still for a moment. He looked at the sprouts for a long time. He did not touch them. He knew his garden well. Every plant, every strip of soil, every seed he had sown, even the sprouts that appeared in the wrong places. But these, they belonged to no memory of planting. "I don't know," Harry said. His voice was low, slightly rough, as if it had been a long time since he had used an honest answer. Lily crouched beside him. She reached her hand toward the sprouts, then pulled it back, as though even the lightest touch might cause them to disappear. "Did they grow by themselves?" she asked. Harry did not reply. He placed his hand on the soil, leaving a small distance between his fingers and the sprouts. The earth was damp and cool, still holding the night's chill, while above it the light was slowly warming. The garden smelled different today. It was no longer the heavy, dark scent of early dawn, nor the warm, clinging sweetness of pineapple he carried from nights at the bar. This was the scent of early spring, very faint, very new, a warmth spreading gradually, without haste, without insistence, as though the earth were quietly adjusting its own breathing. Lily looked up at Harry. "Don't pull them out," she said, with a seriousness that was almost funny. "They're still small." Harry looked at the girl, then at the sprouts. He realized something very small, yet very clear. The garden now held something he had not planned for. Something outside habit, untouched by effort, unbound to memory. Gray stepped a little closer, though he remained behind them. He did not ask questions, did not comment, he only looked on. By now, light had filled the garden. It no longer avoided the old chair. It touched the seat, the backrest, the empty space where Harry had been lying. Harry stood fully upright. He did not return to the chair. Lily stood beside him and took his hand. Her hand was small and warm. "Stay here with me," she said. Harry did not answer, but he did not pull his hand away. The unfamiliar sprouts trembled slightly in the morning breeze. No one knew what they would become. No one named them. They simply existed there, in the familiar garden, like a quiet sign that something had begun to change. And for the first time in a long while, Harry stood in the morning light without stepping away from it. Chapter 4: The Medal. Harry was the same as always. After returning from the late shift, he changed his shirt, rinsed his hands quickly, then stepped into the garden behind the house, where darkness had long learned his footsteps. There was no need to turn on more lights. The faint glow from the veranda was enough for him to tell path from soil. Bed from bed, the garden he had tended for nearly a year now. These habits had settled into his body, carried out without thought. He trimmed excess branches, gathered fallen leaves, bent to straighten patches of disturbed soil. Every movement was slow, even, neither excessive nor lacking. For a long time, Harry's garden had been a stable space. It offered no surprises. It asked for nothing. The rose bushes bloomed on schedule, releasing their familiar scent, soft, rounded, restrained. That scent functioned like reassurance. Everything remained under control. But tonight, the garden was no longer entirely so. Among the beds he knew by heart, a few unfamiliar sprouts had emerged. They did not align with the rose. They did not follow the careful order Harry had maintained. He had noticed them on earlier nights, but only now did their presence sharpen into something undeniable. They were small, but not weak. They stood as if they had chosen their own positions, indifferent to the structure the garden had always obeyed. Harry stood still for a long moment, watching them. He did not bend down, did not touch them. He observed, as though facing something that had not yet been given a name. Then the sound of a plowing machine rose from the distant fields. Low, heavy, rhythmic. It cut through the night air like a pulse that did not belong to this garden. Harry had heard it many times before, but tonight it felt closer. Each rotation of the engine dragged with it a dense surge of earth smell. Thick and raw, pressing straight into the space. That smell was nothing like the soil of his garden. It was not the mild, damp scent of earth turned gently by hand. This was soil torn open deep and hard, coarse. Unsettled, a living smell, almost aggressive. It spread outward, claiming the air, overwhelming the roses that had long served as the garden's steady bass note. Harry inhaled. His chest tightened slightly, not enough to stop his breath, just a faint constriction, as though the air itself had grown denser without warning. The scent from the distant field did not ask permission. It entered his garden, entered his body, carried with it a vitality that was rough, restless, and in constant motion. He remained where he was, tools still in his hands, doing nothing further. The plow continued its rhythm in the distance, a reminder that the world beyond this garden had never stopped moving. Whether this place remained still or not, Harry turned and went inside. The door closed behind him, blocking most of the earth smell. Yet a thin trace followed him in, clinging to his clothes, lingering in his breath. He climbed to the small room where he sat each night to write. The room was enclosed, quiet, a buffer between him and the world. Harry sat at the desk and pulled his journal toward him. Writing had never served a clear purpose. He did not write to preserve, nor to release. It was simply a repeated act, like tending the garden or making coffee, one of the things that allowed the day to end in order. The pen touched the paper. A single line appeared, then stopped. Harry looked up. On the opposite wall, medals hung in neat rows, coated now with a thin layer of dust. The room's light was too weak to make them shine. The metal reflected only a dull, aged glow, as though it too had grown tired of remaining there. He looked at them for a long time. Memory did not arrive violently. It did not need to. Its presence alone was enough. He saw the tracks again, long, straight lanes stretching forward, mornings clear and bright, the surface still cool beneath his feet. He saw himself as he had been then, running forward without looking back. His body light, firm, at ease with motion, each stride clean and decisive. No hesitation, no gaps. Wind struck his face, carrying a different scent entirely, the smell of speed, of sun of mornings filled with laughter. Cheers reached him, blurred and indistinct. He did not need to hear the words. It was enough to know he was moving forward. He remembered the sensation clearly. A heart pounding, yet never tired. A joy so complete it did not require a name. Harry stood, He stepped closer to the wall and touched one of the medals. The cold metal beneath his fingers made him pause for a fraction of a second. He lifted it down. The ribbon was frayed, its color thinned by time, but the weight remained unchanged, heavy in the same way it had been the day it was given to him. He traced its surface with his thumb, slow and deliberate, as if confirming that it still existed, that those years had not been imagined. The image of the track layered itself over the present, the small room, the dark garden, the thick scent of earth still lingering in the air. One realization settled with clarity. Back then, he had always been in motion. Now, motion seemed to occur in his place. Outside, the sound of the plow faded. The earth smell softened, but the unfamiliar sprouts in the garden remained. They did not vanish because he closed a door and turned away. They existed like newly drawn lanes, straight, visible, untouched by footsteps. Harry returned the medal to its place. He did not raise it higher, did not hide it away. He set it back exactly where it had been, as part of the room, as part of himself. He returned to the desk and picked up the pen again. This time, he continued writing. Not much, not carefully, just a few lines, enough to acknowledge that something had shifted tonight. Outside, the garden lay silent. The unfamiliar sprouts stood still in the dark, drawn in the warmth left in the soil. And somewhere, deep beneath that surface, a quiet movement continued, without asking Harry's permission, without waiting for him to be ready. The night closed, and in that stillness, a new starting line had been drawn, even though no one had yet stepped into it. Chapter 5, The Open. This morning began like any other, yet the air no longer held its old rhythm. Harry was seated as usual on the familiar chair beneath the veranda. A cup of coffee rested in his hands, its warmth seeping slowly through the skin, spreading across his palms. The coffee smelled the same, dark, slightly bitter, so familiar it required no attention. But the light was different. It no longer stopped at the edge of the garden as it had for nearly a year. It moved farther in, spilled across the yard, touched the grass, the fence, and this time, it did not avoid him. Harry noticed not with his eyes, but with his skin. A thin band of warmth settled on his forearm. He shifted slightly, not to pull away, but as if to test whether the sensation was real. The morning light was gentle, evenly spread, carrying just enough of early spring's warmth to keep the body from folding inward. He sat a little straighter. Not deliberately, his body adjusted on its own, as though recognizing that today did not require the same degree of retreat. His fingers tightened briefly around the cup, then loosened. A slow breath moved out of him, longer than usual. Harry looked toward the narrow path leading into the garden. Gray usually arrived at this hour. Neither early nor late. Over the past year, his footsteps had become part of the morning, steady, predictable, unremarkable. And as always, the familiar figure appeared at the end of the path, a gardening bag slung at his side. Gray entered the garden at his usual pace. He was accustomed to Harry not looking up right away, accustomed to the prolonged silence, accustomed to mornings in which his presence was acknowledged by nothing more than the faintest nod, or not at all. But today, before Gray could set his bag down, Harry spoke. "Hello, Gray." The greeting was not smooth. A small pause lingered between the words, as if Harry had needed to gather one extra breath to cross that hesitation. His voice was low, unprojected, but clear. Gray stopped. Not abruptly, but just enough for surprise to register plainly on his face. In the years since Harry had first begun bringing home gardening supplies in quiet increments, Gray had never been greeted like this. Their previous meetings had unfolded within a necessary silence, nothing beyond it. "Oh," Gray replied, then smiled, the smile forming more slowly than usual. "Hello." Harry nodded, a small nod, slightly awkward, as though he himself was unaccustomed to what he had just done. He set the coffee cup down, shifted his weight evenly, and stood. The movement was slow, not hesitant, attentive. His first step away from the familiar chair carried an unfamiliar sensation. Not heavy, not light, simply different. Harry stepped out of the shade. Light fell directly onto him. He narrowed his eyes slightly, then left them that way. He did not turn aside. He did not step back. Gray watched without speaking. The two men stood together in the garden. The distance between them was no closer than on other mornings, but it was no longer as wide as before. Harry spoke again, his voice still carrying its habitual caution. "The seeds you brought the other day." Gray turned toward him, waiting. "I planted them." "Oh," Gray said, genuinely attentive. "Have they come up?" Harry nodded, then lifted his hand to gesture toward the base of the old mailbox. "There are a few sprouts, but they're not like the others." Gray stepped closer and crouched down. He examined the unfamiliar seedlings carefully, brushing aside the top layer of soil with his fingertips, studying the shape of the young leaves, the color of the stems. He lingered longer than he usually did with plants he recognized. "True," Gray said, "they don't look like anything I sell." Harry fell silent for a moment. Then, after a clearly felt pause, he asked, "Do you know what they are?" It was the first complete question Harry had asked on his own in a long time. It was not urgent, not insistent, it simply hovered between them. Gray shook his head. "No," he said, "I've never seen them either." Harry nodded. He did not appear disappointed, nor concerned, only as though something had been quietly confirmed. There were things that existed beyond both their understanding. "Then, I suppose, we'll see," Harry said softly. Gray looked at him, his smile now fully present. "Yes," he replied, "we'll see." Light continued to spread through the garden, and when Gray bent to rearrange his tools, Harry did not return to the old chair right away. He remained where he was, standing in the sunlight as it gradually settled into its place. The afternoon passed in a deep sleep. When Harry woke, the room was filled with pale light, not the harsh kind that drags one out of rest, but light gentle enough to allow him a few more minutes, listening to the rhythm of his own breathing. He sat up, unhurried, with no need to force himself into punctuality. The narrow road leading to the bar looked the same, but his steps were different today. Not faster, not slower, simply no longer dragging. Each footfall met the pavement with clarity. At the bar, Harry greeted everyone. "Evening, Harry." He nodded in response, a little awkward, but he did not avoid their eyes. He moved into the familiar routine, wiping down the counter, rearranging bottles, checking each glass. Everything returned to its proper place, as though order remained his way of keeping the world from slipping out of reach. As night settled in, the familiar music began to play, a gentle melody that did not take over the room, only filled its empty spaces. The scent of pineapple from the candle on the counter spread through the air, mingling with tequila as he poured a drink for a woman seated across from him. She watched him as he set the glass down, her gaze lingering longer than courtesy required. "The bar feels comfortable tonight," she said. Harry paused for a moment, then replied, his voice slightly slower than usual. "Yeah, maybe it's the music. Or maybe the bartender," she smiled. Harry faltered, just a little. He bent to adjust the glass, as though needing a reason to look away, then said quietly, "Could be both." She laughed, softly, without insistence, and the conversation began there. "How long have you worked here?" she asked. "For a while," Harry answered. "Do you like it?" He took longer than the question strictly needed. "I don't dislike it," he said. Then, after a very clear pause, he added, "And lately, it doesn't feel as heavy as it used to." She looked at him, but did not press further, did not ask for explanation. The conversation went on. Sometimes Harry spoke in complete sentences, sometimes only halfway before stopping, but he did not withdraw. He stayed within the exchange, even if he was still learning how. When the shift ended, early spring mist settled lightly over the city. Harry walked home carrying the scent of pineapple, of alcohol, and something new, the feeling of having spoken more than usual. In the garden, the unfamiliar sprouts had grown a little taller, their leaves greener, the soil cleaner. There was less to be done. Harry stood there for a while, then went inside. He wrote a few lines in his journal. When he stood up, his foot brushed against a cardboard box filled with drawing tools. The lid slipped open. Harry stopped. This time, he did not close it right away. Chapter 6, Green Strokes. This morning, sunlight nearly covered the entire house. It made no distinctions. It did not stop at the edge of the yard as it had on previous days, but poured over the veranda roof, spilled across the tiled steps, reached into corners long accustomed to shade. The old chair beneath the eaves was still there, yet this time it was no longer the center of stillness. Beside it, the scent of Americano drifted faintly through the air. The coffee cup rested near the edge of the wooden table. Its warmth softened now, leaving only a light trace of aroma, just enough to remind that the morning had begun some time ago. Harry was not lying on the chair. He sat on a lower stool pulled close to the old table. In front of him lay sheets of drawing paper. Watercolor tubes opened and scattered without clear order. A few were dented at the sides, pigment smeared around their caps. Harry leaned forward, intent, as if everything beyond the table had been gently pushed aside. He had been painting for a while. Not hurriedly, not with the aim of finishing anything. His brush moved slowly, hesitantly. At times he stopped for long moments, staring at the blank spaces still untouched. Before mixing more color, the watercolors spread in ways he did not fully control. He did not correct them right away. He let them be, watching how the pigment found its own paths. The garden before him emerged in patches, uncertain, unfixed, a corner of green, a band of light, a curve that suggested the shape of the chair. There were no hard outlines. Everything seemed caught in the moment before deciding what it would become. Lily stood on the steps, watching for a long time. She had never seen Harry like this, not stretched out in silence, not gazing into distance, not simply an adult remaining in the shade. What stood before her now was a Harry doing something, neither housework nor routine repetition, but something new, bound to color and paper. "You're doing it wrong," Lily said at last, her voice serious, as if delivering an important judgment. Harry did not startle. He turned to look at her, briefly surprised, then lifted an eyebrow. "How is it wrong?" he asked quietly. Lily stepped closer, leaning in toward the painting. "The trees should be greener," she said. "The morning sun is like this. Trees can't be sad." Harry looked at the paper, then at the sunlit garden beyond it. He did not argue. He dipped the brush into water, mixed in just a little more green, very lightly, and placed a new stroke onto the page. "So, like this?" he asked. Lily tilted her head, considered for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "That's right, now it's correct." She smiled, satisfied, as if she had completed an important task. Then, without another word, Lily ran back toward her house, leaving Harry alone with the unfinished painting. Harry watched her go. He did not call out, did not ask. A little while later, Lily returned, carrying a small box in her arms. Inside were a few apple cookies, still warm, the scent of butter and fruit spilling out as she opened the lid. "My mom just baked them," Lily said. "I brought some for you. A reward." "A reward?" Harry echoed. "Yes," Lily nodded, "because you worked with nature." Harry let out a very soft laugh, not a sound, just a slight movement at the corner of his mouth. "Thank you," he said. He stood, went inside briefly, then returned with a small packet of candy in his hand. "I bought this yesterday," Harry said, offering it to her. "We'll split it." Lily took it, her eyes lighting up. "You're very fair," she said, then sat down on the step, eating her cookie while watching Harry resume his painting. Sunlight continued to flood the house. Everything was brighter, clearer, yet the overall scene remained familiar in its wornness. The old chair was still there, the wooden table still chipped at one corner. Time's marks had not vanished simply because this morning was different. Harry set the brush down and stepped back, studying the painting. It was not finished. Some spaces remained empty, some shapes had not yet resolved. He did not rush to fill them. He realized he was standing at a peculiar point, no longer fully inside the old stillness, but not yet fully stepped into motion, as if an invisible thread held him suspended between the chair and the painting, between habit and something new, between shade and the sunlight now falling straight across the yard. Lily hopped down from the steps and ran into the garden. She bent to look at the unfamiliar sprouts, then turned back and called out, "Uncle." The plants grew a little more. Harry looked over. He did not answer right away. He picked up the brush again and added one thin stroke to the paper. Only then did he say, "Yes, I see it." The morning continued. There was no sudden revelation, no decisive turning point. Only sunlight, coffee fading to scent alone, apple cookies slowly disappearing, and a man learning how to remain with what he was doing, without yet knowing where it might lead him. Chapter 7. Her. The girl came again tonight. Harry recognized her the moment the door opened, without needing to look closely. Something in him slowed by a fraction, not anticipation, but the ease of familiarity formed through repetition. She chose the same seat near the bar, removed her coat with the same unhurried care, folded it neatly beside her, as if already knowing she would stay for a while. "Tequila," she said when Harry came over. "No ice?" he asked, though he already knew. She nodded, like always. Harry poured the drink. The clear liquid settled at the bottom of the glass. Catching the yellow light, the scent of tequila rose, mingling with the familiar pineapple sweetness in the bar, forming a fragrance particular to this evening. When he set the glass down, she looked up at him. Her gaze was neither probing nor rushed, simply present. "Are you heading out soon?" she asked. Harry glanced at the clock behind the counter. The hour hand had moved farther than he expected. "Pretty soon. So we talk longer tonight than the other times." She smiled. Harry considered that time had passed without his noticing. Their conversation had begun with small things, work, regular customers, the weather, and drifted into matters less easily named. Nothing momentous, nothing shallow. "You're not like most people who work in bars," she said after a brief pause. "How so?" Harry asked, his voice still carrying its habitual caution. "You don't try to be interesting," she replied. "You just stay." Harry nodded faintly. He wasn't sure whether to take it as praise or observation. He didn't argue. "Maybe, because I'm not very good at that," he said, "talking with people." "And yet you do." She shrugged. "That's enough." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, slowly and clearly, "I'm learning how to stay." She looked at him, surprised. "Stay with what?" "With the conversation," he answered. "With the people in front of me." The sentence wasn't smooth. Small pauses interrupted it, as if each word had to be chosen with care. But once spoken, Harry didn't withdraw it. He stood there, wiping the counter lightly, waiting. "That sounds difficult," she said. "It is." Harry nodded. "More than I thought." They continued talking. Sometimes they laughed softly. Sometimes silence stretched for a few beats. But neither hurried to break it. Harry realized he no longer felt the urge to fill every gap with words. He allowed the quiet to exist, as part of the exchange. When he began tidying the last things, she watched him straighten up, his movements slow but certain. "You're heading home?" she asked. "Yes. I'll come again tomorrow," she said, as if stating something ordinary. Harry nodded. "Yeah, I'll be here." Nothing more was said, no plans made, no numbers exchanged, no sentence meant to bind. Yet both understood that tomorrow evening, the conversation could resume exactly where it had paused. Harry stepped out of the bar. The night air was cool, faintly damp. The city had settled, only a few yellow lights stretching along the road he walked every night. The scent of tequila and pineapple clung lightly to his clothes, thinning as the breeze moved through them. He walked slowly, not rushing home as before. The words spoken earlier hovered in his mind, not to be examined, only to remain. When he reached the house, the garden greeted him differently. A month had passed since the first unfamiliar sprouts appeared. Not long, but long enough for visible change. The shoots now had stems, not tall, but firm. Leaves had fully opened, darker green, thicker, slightly coarse to the touch, unlike any plant Harry had ever grown. He paused at the entrance to the garden, not stepping in right away. The veranda light cast shadows of the leaves onto the ground, forming unfamiliar shapes. Harry moved closer. He bent down and touched one leaf. Coolness and moisture spread into his fingertips. The scent of soil rose deep, rounded, familiar, but no longer sharp as it had been in the early nights. It was the smell of earth that had settled, adjusted, accepted the presence of new roots. He realized he had missed many moments, not because he hadn't been here, but because he hadn't watched them grow day by day. The garden had done its work quietly, steadily. The plants now had stems. leaves. A form of their own. Harry stood there for a long time. No panic, no clear joy, only a gradual understanding. Time did not wait for him to be fully ready. He thought of the conversations at the bar, of learning how to stay, sentence by sentence, and he saw the parallel clearly, while he was still learning to open himself inch by inch. The garden had already moved ahead of him. Harry withdrew his hand. He did not prune, did not adjust, did not interfere. He simply stood there, letting night and soil settle into him. When he went inside, he did not turn on the lights right away. The dark room received him with its familiar warmness. He passed the desk, past the box of drawing tools still slightly open. He stopped, but did not touch it. The night closed in silence. Outside, the new stems continued to grow without encouragement, without confirmation, and somewhere deep within Harry, another movement was taking place, slower, more cautious, but no longer still in the way it once had been. Chapter 8, Her Name. The girl came again. For nearly a month now, her presence had become part of the bar's evenings. Not always on time, not always in the same seat, but steady enough that Harry no longer felt surprised when he saw her figure pass through the heavy wooden door. Some nights the bar was crowded, some nights quiet, some nights he barely had time to greet her before turning back to work. Still, she was there, ordering the same drink, keeping the same rhythm of being. Tonight, she arrived earlier than usual. Harry was wiping the counter when he noticed her standing in front of him. Not waiting to be asked, she placed her hand on the wood, leaned in slightly. Her gaze no longer carried its familiar patience. Something in the air had shifted, very slightly, but unmistakably. "Do you know what annoys me?" she asked. Harry stopped his hand. He didn't answer right away. He had grown used to listening before speaking, but this time the silence drew a visible breath from her. "It's been almost a month," she continued, her voice not raised, but edged with irritation. "We talk almost every night. You know what I drink. You know where I sit. You know when I leave late. But you've never asked me my name." The statement carried no accusation. It landed like a fact set down plainly on the bar, nothing added. Nothing softened. Harry felt his throat dry. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, not because he had nothing to say, but because the familiar answers, "I forgot. I didn't think to ask. I'm not good at this," felt insufficient, even unfair. Harry began, then stopped. He bent to adjust a glass in front of him, as though needing a small point of balance. "I didn't mean to." She looked at him, her expression softened slightly, but she didn't step away. "I know," she said, "but knowing doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." Harry nodded, a slow nod, heavier than usual. "I'm used to not asking," he said quietly, "not because I don't care, but because I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" she asked. Harry was silent longer this time. The bar wasn't too busy, the music held steady. Nearby conversations far enough away that no one could hear clearly. "Afraid of saying someone's name," he said at last, "because once I do, I have to admit they stay." She didn't respond immediately. She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether his words were honest or merely another careful way of avoiding what mattered. Then she exhaled, shaking her head faintly. "You're really difficult," she said, but this time, the irritation was gone. What remained was weariness, but fine. She straightened, looking at him as though deciding something on his behalf, something he hadn't yet dared to do himself. "My name is Tiffany," she said. "Remember it, don't forget." The name settled into the bar's air, not loudly, not dramatically, but to Harry, it felt like something placed directly into his hands, solid, weighted, impossible to pretend it had never existed. "Tiffany," he repeated, slowly, testing how the sound fit in his mouth. She nodded. "Yes." Harry looked at her, this time without avoiding her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, "for making you say it first." "It's fine," Tiffany replied, "as long as you remember." She returned to her seat. Harry poured the tequila and set the glass down. He noticed his hand trembling, just slightly. No one else did. The night passed in a strange quiet. They spoke less than usual, yet felt no farther apart. Each time Harry addressed her, even with the briefest sentence, the name remained there. Clear, refusing to let him retreat as he once had. When the bar was nearly closed, Tiffany put on her coat and stood. "I'm not sure I'll make it tomorrow," she said, "but if I do, you know who I am now." Harry nodded. "I do," he said. She smiled, this time without any trace of frustration, and laughed. Harry cleaned the bar later than usual. When he stepped outside, the night air was cool and deep. He walked home carrying the name in his mind, not as a vague memory, but as something that required care. When he reached the house, the garden greeted him with a different presence. A month had passed since the unfamiliar sprouts first appeared. Not long, but enough to mark a change. The shoots were no longer shoots. Of the 4 that had emerged, one had grown noticeably faster. Its stem was taller, sturdier, its leaves broader, darker than the other 3. Under the veranda light, its shape stood out clearly, as though it had already decided what it would become, though no one knew its name. Harry stopped at the garden's edge. He counted again, 4 sprouts, 4 directions of growth, yet only one had risen ahead, as if unwilling to wait for the others to catch up. He crouched and touched the tallest stem. Cool firmness spread into his fingertips. The scent of soil rose deep, steady, no longer sharp or raw. This was not the smell of beginnings, but of something that had taken root. Harry recognized the parallel, uneasy yet impossible to ignore. At the bar, he had just been given a name, a precise presence. In the garden, before him, a form was separating itself from the rest, unnamed, yet undeniable. He did not know what the plant was, and he did not yet know what he would do with the name now placed in his care. Harry stood and stepped back. He did not pull the plant out, did not mark it, did not write anything down. He remained there a while longer, allowing both new things to exist together in the night. A name that had just been spoken, and a shape that had grown beyond expectation. When he went inside, he passed the desk, the journal still open. He stopped, picked up the pen, and wrote a single line. Not long, not explanatory, just a name, and a form not yet called. The night closed. Outside, the tallest plant continued to stand upright in the dark, not waiting to be named. And inside the small house, Harry understood with clarity that some things, once spoken properly, do not disappear easily again. Chapter 9. Again. Today, she did not come back. The bar opened as it always did. The yellow lights flicked on at the usual hour. Familiar music drifted softly through the room. The scent of pineapple from the candle on the counter spread evenly. No different from any other night, yet there was a vacancy unmistakable enough that no one needed to point it out. The seat near the bar remained empty. Harry noticed it from the beginning of his shift, though he did not look at it for long. He wiped down the counter, arranged the bottles, poured drinks for a few regulars. Every movement followed its proper rhythm, without error, but in the spaces between tasks, something unfamiliar slipped in, light, persistent. He checked the clock more often than usual. Tiffany usually arrived around this time, or a little later, never precisely on time, but never so late that the bar was close to closing. Tonight, the minute hand passed its familiar mark. Then a few minutes more. The door stayed shut. Harry reminded himself that it meant nothing. There was no appointment, no promise. She had said there were days she might not come. He had heard her. He had nodded. And yet, when the familiar stretch of time passed without the sound of the door opening, the sense of absence rose naturally, like a reflex. A friend. The thought surfaced more clearly than he expected. Not a woman, not a relationship, simply someone who had become part of the evening, someone whose presence had quietly shaped its rhythm. He kept working. Laughter and conversation around him went on unchanged. But for Harry, the room felt slightly wider, slightly emptier. Just as he began to think that Tiffany might not come tonight after all. The door opened, quietly, without haste. Tiffany stepped inside, slower than usual, her coat set unevenly on her shoulders, her hair less neatly kept. When she saw Harry, she paused for a brief moment, as if needing to confirm she was in the right place. Harry felt his chest ease slightly before he had time to name the sensation. "I'm sorry," Tiffany said as she took her usual seat. "Today, I thought I wouldn't make it." "It's fine," Harry replied softly. "I thought you weren't coming." "Did you?" She gave a faint smile. "That sounds sad." Harry didn't answer. He set the glass of tequila in front of her without asking. Tonight, Tiffany drank faster than usual. Before the first glass had time to dull, there was a second. The conversation continued, but its rhythm had shifted. Some things were repeated, the silences stretched longer. Tiffany laughed more, but the balance she usually carried no longer held. "You know," she said, leaning toward the counter, "there are days I don't want to come here, but then I don't know where else to go." Harry listened. He did not advise, did not probe, he stayed. "At least here," Tiffany went on, her words now threaded with alcohol. "Someone remembers me." Harry looked at her. "I remember," he said. The words fell lightly, but clearly. Tiffany's gaze steadied, as though she wasn't yet used to being affirmed so directly. By the time Harry began clearing the last things, Tiffany was too drunk. She stood, unsteady, gripping the counter for balance. Harry moved around quickly and caught her arm. "Let me," he said, "I'll walk you home." Tiffany didn't object. She nodded and leaned into him, as if the fatigue had finally allowed her to let go. Outside, the night air was cool and damp. Early spring mist lay thin across the street. Harry guided Tiffany at an easy pace. She murmured a few incomplete sentences, then fell quiet, resting her head against his shoulder. "Where do you live?" Harry asked. "Not far," Tiffany answered, walking distance. They passed a few familiar streets, houses, trees, then Harry slowed. Her place was closer than he had expected, not far from his own, only a handful of small streets away. The nearness stopped him for a brief moment, as if something had always been close, only revealing itself now. At her door, Harry paused. Tiffany stood unsteadily, but seemed a little clearer. "Thank you," she said, tired, "for walking me home." Harry nodded. "Next time, drink more slowly," he said, not a reprimand, just a quiet suggestion. Tiffany smiled. "You worry about me?" Harry hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "Yes." Tiffany looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the door, turned back once more. "So, see you tomorrow, Harry?" "Yes," he replied, "tomorrow." Harry stayed there until the door closed. Then he turned toward his own place, the walk shorter than he had ever thought. The night was quiet. But within that quiet, Harry knew clearly, from this moment on, the distance between someone familiar and someone who mattered was no longer as great as it once had been. Chapter 10. Sunshine. The morning began earlier than usual. Sunlight no longer moved cautiously as it had in recent days. It passed over the veranda roof, spilled down the tiled steps, and spread through the garden behind the house in clear bands of light. Thin pockets of shade retreated toward the fence, unable to hold under the rising brightness. The grass caught the light, each blade pale green at its tip. A few remaining drops of dew burst when touched by sun, vanishing quickly enough to leave only a faint dab trace on the soil. From the trees around the house, birds called intermittently, near, then far, without a fixed rhythm, overlapping into a thin layer of sound that settled across the early air. Harry stood in the kitchen, his back to the door, light cut diagonally through the window. Crossing his shoulders, on the stove, a pot of milk warmed slowly, steam rising just enough to blur the air above it. He stirred at an even pace, the spoon touching the pot with a soft, repeated sound. With his other hand, he opened a jar of coffee, tilting it slightly to let the dry scent escape. Milk and coffee blended, neither sharp nor heavy, just enough to fill the small kitchen. On the wooden table by the window, his Americano still sat untouched, the dark surface flat and cool, as though it had been there a long time. The back door opened. Tiffany stepped into the yard. She paused briefly on the step, letting sunlight fall across her face and shoulders. She wasn't wearing shoes. Her bare feet touched the cool stone, the chill passing quickly as she moved onto the grass. The blades bent beneath her steps, leaving marks that didn't last. She walked to the chair set beside Harry's usual one, pulled it out slightly, adjusted its angle, and sat down. The chair made a small sound, so soft it nearly dissolved into birdsong and wind. Tiffany leaned back, letting her weight settle fully against the chair. She tilted her face toward the slice of sky beneath the eaves, where sunlight reached without interruption. The light struck her directly, making her narrow her eyes. She raised a hand to shade her brow, held it there for a moment, then lowered it again, allowing the brightness to remain. Harry brought out a mug. Milk and coffee had blended into a light brown, a thin rim of steam still clinging to the edge. He set it on the table in front of Tiffany, nudging it slightly so it rested in the cooler shade. "There's more sugar," he said quietly. "I added extra." Tiffany wrapped both hands around the mug, warmth spread into her palms. She took a small sip, held it for a moment, then tilted her head, weighing sweetness against bitterness. "Yes," she said, "that's right." Harry pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. He didn't bring his own coffee. He rested his hands on his knees, fingers interlacing briefly before loosening again. In front of them lay the garden. The unfamiliar plants were taller now. Their leaves opened wide, casting uneven shadows that patterned the ground. "Mornings here," Tiffany said, her gaze fixed on the garden, "are nothing like last night." Harry nodded, light passing across his cheek and the bridge of his nose. "I don't often have someone sitting here," he said slowly. Tiffany set the mug down, turning it slightly, leaving a thin dab ring on the wood. "Well," she said, "today you do." Harry didn't respond. His eyes followed the small movement of the cup, then drifted back to the yard. After a while, footsteps approached along the narrow side path. Bray appeared, his familiar canvas bag slung over one shoulder. When he noticed Tiffany, he slowed slightly, his gaze passing over the two chairs before settling on the garden. Then he continued forward. "Good morning," Bray said. "Morning," Tiffany replied, turning toward him. Bray set the bag down. Fabric met ground with a dull sound. He opened it and took out several packets of rose seeds. Arranging them on the table, the pale paper caught the sunlight. Harry picked one up, glanced at the back, his thumb tracing the edge, then nodded. Bare feet ran along the fence line, quick, uneven steps. Lily appeared, her dress askew, hair tied loosely to one side. She stopped when she saw Tiffany, studied her for a moment, then looked to Harry. "Who's that, Uncle?" Harry opened his mouth, but Tiffany had already crouched down, lowering herself to Lily's height. "I'm Tiffany," she said, smiling. Lily nodded, as if that answered everything. "So, are we planting flowers?" Lily asked, turning to Gray, not waiting for confirmation. Gray laughed and handed her more seeds. They spread out across the garden. Harry took a small shovel, pressed it into the soil with his foot, and dug shallow holes. The earth parted, dark, moist. Tiffany knelt beside him, her dress brushing the ground, placed seeds into each hollow, then covered them with care, her movements slow and deliberate. Lily worked faster, soil streaking her sleeves and knees. Unconcerned. "Gently," Tiffany said, brushing off her hands. "But that takes forever," Lily replied, packing soil down with enthusiasm. Harry finished one hole and moved to the next, his rhythm steady. "Either way works," he said. A breeze passed through, carrying the scent of freshly turned soil across the yard. Sunlight fell directly onto the garden. Unobstructed, birds continued calling, fretting through the sounds of metal meeting earth and loose dirt falling back into place. When they were done, Lily stood first, dusted her hands carelessly, and ran a quick circle around the yard. She stopped in front of the taller plants and pointed. "That one's the tallest," she said. "Why did it grow so fast?" Harry followed her gaze. That stem stood above the others, leaves wider, darker, veins pronounced in the light. "I don't know," he said. Gray gathered his things, tied the bag shut, brushed soil from his trousers. "Some plants grow when they want to," Gray said. "They don't wait." Lily ran toward the gate, waving as she went. Gray followed, calling a goodbye before leaving. The yard quieted. Tiffany sat back down, her mug now half empty, a thin trace of milk foam clinging to the rim. Harry leaned against the table, looking at the freshly covered patches of earth, still darker than the rest. "Do you usually plant in the morning?" Tiffany asked. "No," Harry said, "usually at night. Then today's different." Harry looked at his hands, soil drying in the lines of his fingers. "Yes." They stayed there a while longer. Neither spoke. Sun climbed higher, shadows shortened, birdsong thinned into silence. Tiffany stood, took her mug, and carried it to the outdoor sink. Water ran, clear, brief, then stopped. "I'm going to change," she said. "I'll be back." Harry nodded. After she left, he remained where he was. He looked over the garden, the newly planted soil, the older stems standing among them, leaves moving lightly in the breeze. The chair beside him was no longer empty. His Americano still sat untouched. Harry picked it up and took a sip. The coffee was cold. He set it down, then bent and adjusted a small patch of soil the wind had shifted. The morning continued. Nothing else needed to be said. Chapter 11. Warmth. Their meetings began to occur more often, without a fixed schedule, without the need to arrange them. Some afternoons Tiffany came by simply to sit for a while in the garden. Some mornings she arrived while Harry was still rearranging his easel. The wooden back door gradually grew accustomed to opening without warning. No one commented on it. No one asked when it had turned into a habit. That afternoon, the light passed through Harry's room at a very low angle. It did not flood the space, only slipped in through the window, stretching into a thin band across the wooden floor. The room carried the scent of paper, watercolor, old wood. Harry sat before the easel, his back slightly curved, a pencil in his hand, his head lowered. Tiffany was not in the room. She sat outside on the porch, leaning back in her chair, watching the garden. A light breeze moved through the newly planted rose bushes. Young leaves trembled, brushing against one another with soft, nearly inaudible sounds. She reached out and touched a bud that had not fully opened yet. Her fingers paused, then withdrew. Inside, Harry looked up. He did not look directly at Tiffany. His gaze rested on the empty space before him, where her shape took form on the paper. The outlines were still faint. No color had been placed yet. He mixed his paints slowly, adding water a little at a time, stirring gently, waiting for the tone to settle before lifting the brush. The chair on the porch shifted softly. Tiffany adjusted her position, drawing one leg up, resting her chin on her knee. She looked into the room, saw Harry's back, the slight lift of his shoulders each time he paused to think. She did not call out. She did not ask anything. She only watched. After a while, she spoke. "Do you usually paint in the afternoon?" Harry did not turn around. "Yeah," he said. "The light's easier to work with." "Who are you painting?" she asked, her voice light. Harry stopped. The brush hovered in the air for a beat, then lowered. "The person sitting out there," he said. Tiffany laughed softly, not loud. "Then don't make me look bad," she said. Harry did not reply. He bent down again and laid a pale wash onto the canvas. The afternoon moved slowly. Tiffany stood and stepped into the room. She stopped behind Harry, not too close. The light from the window fell on them from different directions. "Where will you hang the painting?" Tiffany asked. "I don't know yet," Harry said. "Maybe here." She leaned in to look. The face was not yet clear, only familiar curves. A body turned slightly to the side, hair falling over one shoulder. "It looks more like me than I expected," she said. Harry set the brush down. "It's not finished," he said. "But I recognize her," Tiffany replied. When the painting was finished, Harry hung it on the wall opposite his bed. He measured the distance carefully, adjusted the height several times, and only then drove the nail in. The painting sat straight, neither tilted nor drawing attention to itself. Tiffany leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed. "You didn't sign it," she said. "No need," Harry replied. In the days that followed, the roses began to grow noticeably taller. Their stems grew firmer, their leaves thicker. One afternoon, Tiffany came by wearing a light jacket. She stood in the garden, bending down to examine each plant. "This one's budding," she said. Harry stepped closer and looked. "Yeah," he said, "a few more days." Tiffany straightened, brushing her hands together. "Let's go to work," she said. "We're late." Harry nodded. He locked the door and followed her down the narrow path leading toward the street. They walked side by side, not touching, but close enough that their sleeves brushed whenever their steps fell out of sync. "Did you bring a jacket?" Tiffany asked. "No," Harry said. She stopped, slipped hers off, and handed it to him. "Take it," she said. "It gets cold at night." Harry looked at her, hesitated for a moment, then took it. "Thank you," he said. At the bar, the yellow lights came on. Tiffany sat in her usual seat, but tonight she sat closer. Harry mixed the drink and set the glass down in front of her. "The usual?" he asked. "Yeah," Tiffany said, "but lighter." Harry nodded. They talked between the moments when Harry turned away to work. Short exchanges slipped between the clink of glasses and the background music. "You hung the painting?" Tiffany asked. "Yeah." "Has anyone seen it yet?" "No." "Good," she said. "I like it there." When they finished work, they walked home together. The distance was short, street lights stretched out ahead of them, their shadows lengthening across the pavement, sometimes overlapping. "Are you going to paint tonight?" Tiffany asked. "Maybe," Harry said. "Then I'll watch," she said. When they reached the house, the garden was darker than it had been during the day. The roses stood still in the night, their stems faint under the porch light. Harry opened the door. Tiffany stepped inside first. She stopped in front of the painting and looked at it for a long time. "You put me here," she said. Harry stood behind her without speaking. "It's okay," Tiffany added. "I like it." She turned and passed by him, her hand brushing lightly against his as she went by. Harry did not move away. The evening unfolded slowly. No one hurried. No one asked anything more. Outside, the wind passed through the garden. The roses stirred gently. Inside the small room, the painting rested quietly on the wall, the light touching only one corner of it. Harry stood beside the easel. Tiffany sat in the chair, watching him. "Go on," she said. "Keep painting." Harry lifted the brush. And the afternoon, the evening, and the days that followed continued, one flowing into the next. Chapter 12. Touch. The bar closed with a soft click of the lock. The lights inside dimmed one by one, leaving only the glow spilling out from a few windows along the street. The air was cooler than during the day, carrying the thin dampness from the river. Harry pulled his jacket up a little higher and waited on the steps. Tiffany came out behind him, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "Walk?" she asked. Harry nodded. They turned into the narrow road leading toward the bridge. Streetlights grew farther apart. Cars passed in the distance, their sound drifting through rather than pressing in. The pavement was still damp, catching the light in long, broken reflections. Tiffany walked more slowly than usual. Harry adjusted his pace to match. Their sleeves brushed once, then again, very lightly. Neither of them changed direction. The bridge appeared ahead. A gray metal railing, old and worn, the span wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Below, the river moved slowly, reflecting the streetlights in fragments that broke apart and rejoined. Wind cut across the bridge, carrying the scent of water and metal. They stepped onto it. Their footsteps sounded clearer here, more even than on the street. Tiffany rested her hand on the railing, walking close to the edge. Harry walked on the inside, looking straight ahead. Halfway across, Tiffany stopped. Harry stopped with her, without asking. Cars passed far off, their lights sliding by and disappearing. The wind strengthened slightly, lifting Tiffany's hair to one side. She reached up to smooth it back, not turning right away. "This weekend," Tiffany said. "Are you free?" Harry looked down at the bridge, then out at the river. "Maybe," he said. "Let's go somewhere," she continued. "Not far." Harry was quiet for a beat. "Okay," he said. Tiffany turned to face him. The distance between them was small. The bridge light fell over her face, leaving the rest in shadow. She looked at Harry for a long moment without speaking. The wind moved again, tugging at Harry's jacket. Tiffany stepped closer by half a step. One hand stayed on the railing, her fingers loosely curled. "You always stand so still," she said. Harry didn't answer. Tiffany lifted her other hand, touched the sleeve of his jacket, and gave it a small pull. Not strong, just enough to make him turn toward her. The distance closed. The sound of water rose steadily beneath the bridge. Behind them, the streetlights formed a dim halo. There was no one else on the bridge. Tiffany tilted her head up. Harry leaned down, very slowly. There was no counting, no warning. Their lips met. At first, it was light, only a brief point of contact. As if testing, Tiffany didn't pull away. Harry remained still. The wind passed through again, stronger now, setting the railing vibrating faintly. The kiss held for another beat. Harry placed his hand on the railing beside Tiffany's. Their hands were close, but not touching. Tiffany tilted her head slightly. Harry followed the movement. Then they separated. Neither of them spoke. Tiffany leaned back against the railing and looked up at the sky. Above, clouds drifted slowly, covering part of the moon. Harry stood facing her, looking into the empty space beyond her shoulder. "Cold?" Tiffany asked. "No," Harry said. She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. Then she straightened and turned to continue walking. Harry followed. They crossed the rest of the bridge. Down the steps on the other side, their footsteps softened again. The road leading home felt more familiar. The streetlights were evenly spaced now. No one said anything more. At the intersection, Tiffany stopped. "My place is this way," she said. Harry stopped as well. "Yeah." Tiffany stepped forward and hugged him quickly. Not tight, not lingering. Then she stepped back. "See you tomorrow," she said. "Yeah," Harry replied. Tiffany turned away. Her figure merged into the streetlight. Growing smaller, Harry stood there a while longer, then turned in the opposite direction. The road home was quiet. A few windows were still lit. The wind moved gently, carrying the smell of the river. Harry opened the gate and stepped into the yard. The garden lay in shadow, only the porch light reaching a few rose bushes. The buds leaned slightly in the breeze. He stood in the middle of the yard for a long time. Then he went inside and closed the door. In the room, the painting was still on the wall. Harry draped his jacket over a chair. He stood in front of the painting, looked at it for a moment, then turned away. Outside, the river continued to flow beneath the bridge. Light reflected, broke apart, came together again. Chapter 13, The Roses. Morning sunlight spreads very slowly, as if testing each small corner of the garden before moving on. It slips over the veranda roof, falls onto the steps, follows the narrow dirt paths between the beds, then pauses on leaves that still hold the night's dew. The air is cool and clear. The scent of damp soil, young leaves, and newly grown roses blends gently, evenly, without one overtaking the others. Harry stands at the far end of the garden, a watering can in his hand. Water pours out in a thin stream, striking the ground with small, steady sounds. He tilts the can just enough so the soil around the roots is not disturbed. The rose bushes stand upright, not very tall yet, their leaves a deep green, lightly glossy in the early light. Tiffany crouches nearby, her dress brushing the earth. She lifts a rose branch with both hands, studying each leaf, each bud still tightly closed. Her fingers touch the stem very lightly, then withdraw, as if afraid of hurting the plant. "I like roses," Tiffany says. Her voice is not loud, just enough to pass through the quiet of the morning. Harry nods. He sets the watering can down, wipes his hands on his trousers, then steps closer. They stand side by side, looking at the same plant. "This one," Tiffany continues, pointing to a bud angled slightly toward the sun. "When it blooms, it'll be beautiful." Harry bends down, following the line of her finger. The bud is still firm, the petals pressed together, green tinged with pale pink. "Yes," he says, "probably in a few days." Tiffany stands up, brushing the soil from her knees. She walks along the row of roses, moving slowly, as if counting each bush. Harry follows behind her, not too close, but near enough to hear her footsteps on the earth. The wind moves through the garden, stirring the leaves. Sunlight slides across the ground, forming interlaced patches of brightness. Tiffany stops beside an old chair beneath the veranda. She places her hand on the backrest and gives it a gentle push. The chair lets out a soft sound. Tiffany sits down, her hands resting on the armrests, rocking very lightly. The chair moves slowly, unevenly. She tilts her head up toward the underside of the roof, where the sunlight has not yet reached. "This chair is nice in the morning," she says. "The breeze is just right." Harry leans against the veranda post, watching her. Sunlight catches in Tiffany's hair, brightening each strand. She rocks a little more, her feet brushing the ground, then lifting again. "Want to sit?" Tiffany asks, turning toward him. Harry shakes his head. "You sit," he says. Tiffany smiles. The smile appears quickly, then fades, not lingering. She continues to rock, her gaze drifting over the garden. "Here," she says, "it feels like everything is telling a story." Harry does not answer. He bends down, picks up a fallen leaf near the chair, turns it lightly between his fingers, then places it back on the ground. The morning continues to move on. The sun rises higher, reaching deeper into the garden. Tiffany steps inside for a moment, then returns holding a small wind chime. It is made of thin metal, suspended from a short string. She stands on the step, looks up at the veranda roof, then turns to Harry. "Is it okay to hang it here?" she asks. Harry steps closer, following her gaze. "That's fine," he says. He brings over a small wooden ladder and places it against the veranda post. Tiffany hands him the chime. It feels cool when it touches his hand. Harry climbs one step up and hooks the chime onto an old iron hook already there. He adjusts the string so it hangs straight. When he steps down, Tiffany moves back slightly. The wind passes, the chime trembles and releases a clear, delicate sound that rings once, then fades. Tiffany lifts her head and listens. "That sounds nice," she says. The chime stirs again, this time a little longer. The sound spreads, blending with birdsong and wind. Tiffany returns to the chair and sits, rocking gently. The wind chime responds to each shift in the breeze. The garden is no longer silent. The sounds are scattered, uneven, yet they do not disturb the space. Harry sits down on the step, a short distance from Tiffany. He props his hands behind him and looks up at the veranda, where the chime hangs suspended. "Do you usually wake up this early?" Tiffany asks. "Not really," Harry replies, "just these past few days." "Then I came at the right time," she says. Harry says nothing. He turns to look at Tiffany. Her smile appears again, easy and unforced. The corners of her mouth lift, her eyes narrowing slightly as the sunlight reaches them. Tiffany raises a hand to block the light, then lowers it again. She stands and walks back into the garden, bending to examine the roses. Harry follows. "This one," Tiffany says, touching another stem. "It looks healthy." Harry crouches to look. The stem is firm, the leaves thicker than those on the nearby plants. "Yes," he says. They move from one bush to the next. Tiffany asks questions. Harry answers briefly. Sometimes Tiffany speaks without waiting, commenting on the color of the leaves, the way the light rests on the petals. Harry listens, not interrupting. The wind grows a little stronger. The chime rings continuously, the sounds overlapping, then separating again. Tiffany straightens and turns back toward the veranda, listening. "It sounds like a call," she says. Harry looks at the chime, then at Tiffany. The morning is nearly gone now. Sunlight covers the entire garden. Shadows shorten. Tiffany sits down again, rocking slowly. Harry stands nearby, his hands in his pockets. "I like it here," Tiffany says. Harry nods. She turns to him. Her smile appears once more, light and clear. Harry remains still, his gaze fixed on her. The wind chime rings again. The sound lingers in the air, then fades. The garden holds steady in the light. Roses, the wooden chair, the wind chime, birdsong, and the two of them there, sharing the same morning. Chapter 14, A Day. The first morning Tiffany woke up in that house arrived very softly. Light slipped through the curtains, not sharp, just enough to draw along quiet shapes across the wooden floor. Tiffany opened her eyes without hurrying to sit up. She lay on her side, looking at the ceiling, where old wood grain ran parallel like lines on a palm. Beside her, Harry was still asleep, his breathing even and slow. The room was so quiet she could hear the faint movement of wind passing through a narrow gap in the door. Tiffany got up first. She moved lightly, her bare feet touching the cool floor. She pulled the curtain a little farther aside to let more light in, then folded the blanket neatly. The pillow was straightened, the edge of the bed aligned. She walked through the living room and stopped for a moment, looking around. The house was the same as before, but several things were not quite in place. A chair sat slightly off. A book lay open, face up. One metal hung lower than the others. Tiffany pulled the chair closer to the table. She picked up the book. closed it, and set it back on the shelf. Then she stopped in front of the wall where the medals were scattered. She took each one down and placed them on the table. The metal surfaces caught the morning light. Glinting softly, she wiped each medal with the edge of her shirt and hung them back up. This time the ribbons were straight, the spacing even, the certificates were rearranged, the frames adjusted so none of them leaned. Harry stood in the doorway, watching. He didn't say anything, just rested his back against the frame, arms folded. "Is it okay if I rearrange them?" Tiffany asked, without turning. "Yeah," Harry said. She continued. When she finished, Tiffany stepped back and looked at the wall as a whole. Light struck the medals, forming small, steady points of brightness. In the kitchen, Tiffany turned on the stove. The smell of toast spread quickly. She sliced the bread and placed it on a plate. Coffee was made just strong enough. An Americano was set near the window. Where the light fell first, she added hot water, stirred gently, and placed the cup on a tray. Harry sat at the table when Tiffany brought breakfast out. "You're up early," he said. "I'm used to it," she replied. They ate without rushing. Crisp bread, warm coffee. Tiffany stood first, picked up Harry's cup, and carried it out to the porch. She set it on the small table beside the two chairs. Harry followed and pulled out a chair. Dawn revealed itself slowly. The sun rose from behind the trees, casting gold across the garden. The roses stood still, their leaves trembling slightly in the breeze. The wind chime made a single, faint sound. Tiffany sat beside Harry, both hands resting on her knees. "Mornings here," she said, "are very quiet." Harry looked toward the light and nodded. A little later, a familiar vehicle stopped outside the gate. Gray appeared with a sack of fertilizer over his shoulder. He stepped inside and noticed the two of them sitting on the porch. "Morning," Gray said. "Good morning," Tiffany replied. Gray set the sack down and brushed his hands. "The plants are growing fast," he said, looking toward the garden. Harry stood and walked over. "Yeah," he said, "the last few days." Tiffany followed, crouching to examine a rose bush. "How do you mix this?" she asked. Gray explained. Tiffany listened, nodding. Harry stood beside her, holding a shovel. They worked in silence, with only the sound of soil and wind. When they finished, Gray said goodbye and left. Tiffany watched him go, then turned back. In the afternoon, Tiffany tidied Harry's workroom. She sorted the paints by order, wiped down the table, repositioned the easel. The painting of Tiffany was rehung, straightened, a little higher than before. Harry stood watching, hands in his pockets. "You're doing too much," he said. "It's fine," Tiffany replied. As evening came, Harry changed clothes and prepared to leave for the bar. Tiffany stood in the doorway and adjusted his collar. "I'll be back early," she said. Harry nodded. He stepped outside, the familiar road, the familiar bar. The lights turned on, the scent of pineapple filled the room. Harry worked as he always did, pouring drinks, wiping the counter, music playing softly. When Harry returned, the porch light was still on. Yellow light spilled across the steps, slanting through the garden. The wind was light, just enough to stir the rose leaves, just enough to set the wind chime beneath the porch ringing once. Thin and brief, before falling silent, the street in front of the house was quiet. No cars, no voices. Harry paused at the gate for a long moment. He looked into the yard. The soil beds turned earlier that morning were smoother now. Footprints fading, the rose bushes stood upright, their shadows stretching across the ground. The chair beneath the porch was still there, placed close to the one beside it, the distance between their armrests smaller than before. Harry stepped inside. The door closed behind him very softly. Inside, the living room light was still on. The space was quiet, but not empty. On the table, a ceramic cup sat upside down on a drying cloth, watermarks not yet fully gone. On the shoe rack, Tiffany's shoes were placed neatly beside his, their toes pointing in the same direction. Harry took off his jacket and hung it up. He passed the wall of medals. They hung in straight lines now, reflecting the light into small, even points, none tilted, none out of place. He stopped in front of the painting in the room. It was still there. The lamp lit one corner, leaving the rest in shadow. Harry stood still, not stepping closer. He simply looked, as if checking something familiar. From the porch, the wind chime rang once more. The sound was very soft, dissolving quickly into the night air. Harry stepped outside. Tiffany was asleep in one of the chairs. Her back rested against it, her head tilted to one side. A thin blanket lay across her shoulders. Her hair fell forward, covering part of her face. Her breathing was slow and even. Harry stood beside her. He didn't call her name, didn't touch her shoulder. He bent down and pulled the blanket a little higher, adjusting it so the edge didn't touch the ground. The movement was careful, as though he were trying not to wake the air itself. The wind passed through, carrying the smell of soil and leaves. The roses shifted faintly. The wind chime rang again, longer this time, then fell silent. Harry sat down in the chair beside her. He leaned back and looked up at the patch of sky above the porch roof. Clouds veiled the moon, leaving only a dim below. The night was so still he could hear insects far away. He sat there, doing nothing more. After a while, Tiffany stirred. She opened her eyes and turned her head slightly toward him. "You're back?" she asked, her voice low with sleep. "Yeah," Harry said. She didn't sit up, only turned her head a little more so she could see him. Then she drew the blanket closer and closed her eyes again. Harry didn't say anything else. He rested his hand on the armrest. The two chairs were close enough that their wooden edges touched faintly when the wind passed through. The night moved slowly. Inside the house, everything had settled into place. In the garden, the trees stood still. The wind chime did not ring again. The porch light remained on, just bright enough to show the path. The two of them sat there, without needing to speak. The house breathed with them. And the night ended that way. Chapter 15. Broken. Harry came home after work. The street in front of the house was emptier than usual. The porch light switched on as he approached, its yellow glow spilling over the steps and spreading across the tiled ground in a familiar pool of light. His shadow stretched out, slanted slightly by the angle of the lamp, touched the door, then broke apart as he reached for the lock. The door closed behind him very slowly, as if unwilling to add any unnecessary sound to the night. The house held only him now. The space was quiet, but not hollow. On the table remained a few traces of the day. A book set too close to the edge. A folded cloth not quite straight. The faint scent of old coffee lingering in the air. Harry stood still in the middle of the room, letting his gaze pass over each familiar corner. Everything was there, in its place, yet missing the small movements he had grown used to over the past days. He set his keys down on the table. The sound of metal against wood rang clearer than he expected, a single, brief note that vanished at once. Harry remained where he was a moment longer, then turned toward the garden. Outside, the night was cooler. The wind carried the smell of damp soil, of leaves, of grass cut earlier in distant yards. The porch light did not reach very far, just enough to reveal the garden beds and the 4 young trees standing at the front. They were no longer saplings. Their trunks had thickened, steady now, their leaves spreading in layered tiers. One tree stood noticeably taller than the others, its canopy reaching outward, its shadow stretching long across the ground. Harry stood in front of them for a long time. He did not bend down. He did not reach out to touch them. He only looked. The wind passed through, leaves brushing against one another with small, indistinct sounds, like whispers without words. The wind chime beneath the porch roof stirred once, a thin, brief note, then fell silent. Harry turned back toward the house and rolled up his sleeves. He began to tidy. He pushed the chair closer to the table, straightened it. He picked up the misplaced book, brushed the dust lightly from its cover, and set it back on the shelf. He wiped the tabletop corner by corner, moving the cloth slowly so nothing was missed. In the kitchen, he turned on the tap and washed the remaining cups. Water ran evenly in the quiet space. The sound was clearer than it ever was during the day. He lifted one ceramic cup and turned it in his hands to check it. As he lowered it toward the sink, his grip slipped. The cup fell, struck the side of the basin, and shattered across the tiled floor. The sound came suddenly, sharp and dry, causing the space to seem to halt. Harry stood still. Shards of porcelain lay scattered at his feet, some pieces flung farther than the others, reflecting the light in cold points. Water continued to run from the tap, spilling over the sink's edge and creeping across the floor. He turned off the tap, bent down, picked up the fragments one by one, very slowly. Some pieces were large, still holding the curve of the cup's rim. Others were small and sharp. He gathered them together, wrapped them in a cloth, and folded it closed. His hands were damp. Drops of water fell onto the floor, forming small circles that spread and disappeared. Harry straightened and let out a very quiet breath, as though finishing something that needed to be done. He carried the bundle of broken pieces outside and set it to one side. Then he returned to the garden and took up the shears. The blades clicked softly in the night. He trimmed excess leaves, dry branches. Leaves fell to the ground and stayed where they landed. He bent to gather them, placing them neatly aside. The soil beneath his feet was soft, still holding moisture. The wind moved across his shoulders, cool but comfortable. When everything was in order, Harry washed his hands, dried them, and made coffee. Hot water poured down, the scent of coffee spreading slowly. Filling the kitchen, he prepared a fresh Americano, more carefully than usual. The cup was set on the small table outside on the porch, where the familiar chair waited. Harry sat down. The sky in the east had begun to pale. A thin band of light appeared beyond the line of trees, not yet clear, but enough to signal the coming morning. He took a sip of coffee. The bitterness spread, warming his throat. He leaned back and looked out at the garden. The 4 trees stood there, each with its own shape, its own pocket of space. The wind passed through. The leaves stirred lightly. The wind chime sounded once more, a thin note that rang out and dissolved into the brightening air. Harry remained still. The coffee cooled in his hands. Morning arrived slowly, evenly, as it always did. Chapter 16. Take care. That evening, Tiffany waited for him. The lights had been on since early. Yellow light filled the living room, falling across the wooden floor in lawn. Soft bands. The house was quiet, marked only by the slow ticking of the wall clock and the faint movement of wind slipping through a narrow gap in the door. Tiffany sat in the chair near the porch, her back resting against the armrest, her hands placed neatly on her lap. She wasn't reading, she wasn't looking at her phone. From time to time, she glanced toward the door, then looked away again. The sound of the lock came later than usual. The door opened. Harry stepped inside. His footsteps were uneven. His jacket sat crooked on his shoulders, the top button of his shirt undone. The smell of alcohol followed him in, warm and heavy. He paused at the threshold for a brief moment, as if steadying himself, then closed the door behind him. Tiffany stood up at once. "You drank that much," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was tight. Harry didn't answer right away. He took off his shoes slowly and left them slightly askew by the wall. When he looked up, his eyes were unfocused, not quite settling. "There was a party," he said quietly. "A lot of guests." Tiffany exhaled and stepped closer. When he leaned, she reached out to support him. The smell of alcohol grew stronger as the distance closed. She frowned, but she didn't let go. "Sit down," she said. Harry let her guide him to the chair. He sat, his back against the rest, his head lowered slightly. Tiffany stood in front of him for a moment, watching, then turned away. She brought water. The glass was placed in his hand. His grip was unsteady. The water trembled near the rim. Tiffany placed her hand over his, steadying it. "Drink," she said. Harry took a small sip, then another. She stayed beside him, watching each movement. When the glass was empty, she took it back and set it on the table. Tiffany went into the bedroom and returned with a damp cloth. She bent down and wiped his face. The cloth was cool against his skin. Harry closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. Tiffany paused for a beat, then continued wiping. "I don't like it when you come home drunk," she said. Harry didn't respond. He let her remove his jacket and hang it up. Tiffany helped him stand and guided him into the bedroom. His steps were heavy, slow. She held him with both hands, keeping him from swaying. She helped him lie down and pulled the blanket up over him. Harry turned onto his side and pressed his face into the pillow. Tiffany stood by the bed for a moment, then turned off the light. Before leaving the room, she stopped and looked at him once more. The night moved very slowly. Morning arrived on a soft light. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, touching the floor, then the edge of the bed. Harry opened his eyes. His head felt heavy. His throat was dry. He stayed still for a while, letting the light spread. From the garden came birdsong, uneven, scattered. He sat up. The house was quiet. From the porch, the wind chime sounded once, a thin note, then fell silent. Harry stood and went outside. Tiffany was in the garden. She wore a white dress. The fabric was light and thin. Small yellow flowers were scattered across it. Bright under the sun, she bent beside one of the plants, holding a watering can. Water flowed in a narrow stream, darkening the soil around the base. Her hair fell over her shoulder, moving gently in the breeze. Harry stood on the step and watched. Tiffany didn't turn right away. She moved from one plant to the next, watering each just enough. When she straightened, she brushed a bit of soil from her dress and continued. Sunlight fell across her face, softening its lines. Harry stepped down and walked toward her. His footsteps were very quiet on the grass. "You're awake," Tiffany said, without turning. "Yeah," Harry replied. She turned to look at him. Her eyes passed over his face, paused for a moment, then softened. "Drink some water," she said. "It's in the kitchen." Harry didn't go. He stepped closer instead, looking at the yellow flowers on her dress. The wind passed through, lifting the fabric slightly. The wind chime rang again, clearer this time. Tiffany bent down to straighten a branch that had tilted. Harry crouched beside her and held the base of the plant. "This one's growing fast," Tiffany said. Harry nodded. A moment later, the sound of bare feet running came from the fence. "Uncle Harry." Lily appeared, her hair tied high, her dress bright. She ran into the garden, looked around, and laughed. "The garden feels totally different," she said. "It's full of life." She ran to the rose bed and bent down to examine the blooms. "These are so pretty," Lily said. "Yesterday they weren't even open." Tiffany stood and smiled at her. "Do you want to help water them?" she asked. Lily nodded vigorously. Tiffany handed her the watering can. Lily held it with both hands, watering carefully, spilling a little without noticing. Harry stood and watched. Sunlight filled the garden, over the roses, over the white dress, over the small yellow flowers. The wind chime rang again and again. Its sound clear and even. Harry stepped beside Tiffany and reached for her hand. Her hand was cool, soft. He held it a little tighter. Tiffany turned to look at him and didn't pull away. Lily looked up at them and grinned. "The wind chime sounds happy," she said. The chime rang brightly. The wind picked up. The roses swayed. Sunlight spread across the garden. Harry stood there, holding Tiffany's hand, without saying anything. Chapter 17. Promise. The shore appeared before them like the world letting out a long breath. The sandy path leading to the sea still held the faint marks of old tire tracks, bordered by low grasses bent sideways by the salted wind. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of the ocean straight into their lungs with the first breath. When they stepped fully out of the narrow trail, the space opened abruptly, so wide that they both slowed, as if needing an extra moment to adjust to such vastness. The sea stretched all the way to the horizon. Its surface was in constant motion, wave after wave rising, breaking, retreating, leaving behind thin streaks of white foam that dissolved quickly into the sand. The sound of the surf was not loud, not violent, but deep and steady, like a great heart beating slowly beneath the sky. Harry and Tiffany walked side by side. Their hands were joined naturally, as though they had been doing so for a long time. The sand beneath their feet was cool, yielding slightly with each step. Every footprint appeared clearly, but with the next surge of water, all traces were erased, returning the shore to a smooth, untouched surface. Tiffany slipped off her shoes and carried them in her hand. Her dress lifted lightly in the sea wind, brushing her knees before falling away again. Her hair was caught and scattered by the breeze, some strands clinging to her cheek, others brushing her lips. She lifted a hand to push it back, laughed softly, then let the wind continue its play. "Here," Tiffany said, her voice quiet but clear. "I always feel lighter." Harry looked at her, then at the sea. Morning light spread across the water, forming shifting fields of brightness. He tightened his grip on her hand just a little, feeling the warmth pass through her skin into his own. They walked along the water's edge. A wave reached Tiffany's ankles. She shivered slightly but didn't step back. She moved forward again, letting the water soak the hem of her dress. Harry pulled her hand instinctively, but she shook her head. "It's okay," she said. "I like this feeling." Harry relaxed his hold and let her move closer to the surf. He watched the water touch her skin, then withdraw, leaving it wet and shining under the sun. "I really love dawn," Tiffany said, her gaze fixed on the distance, where the sun was rising slowly. "And sunset too, those moments. They feel like beginnings and endings at once. Different, but equally beautiful." Harry remained silent. He listened without interrupting. "I always want to move toward the light," Tiffany went on. "Not because it's always warm, but because there, I know I'm walking toward light, not running away from darkness." The wind grew stronger. The crash of the waves came louder. Closer. Tiffany turned to look at Harry. Her gaze did not waver, did not retreat. "There were times," she said more slowly, "when I thought I would have to walk alone. And then, I met you." Harry felt his steps falter. He looked at her closely, at the way light reflected in her eyes, making them deeper, clearer. In them he saw not only the sea, but himself as well, small, but unmistakably present. "I don't know what to call this feeling," Tiffany said, her voice softening, as if afraid the wind might carry it away. "Only that, when I'm with you, I don't have to turn my back on the light anymore." She stopped. Harry stopped with her. A wave reached his shoes, cold water seeping through the leather. He flinched slightly, but did not move away. He stood there, facing Tiffany. "And you," she said, her voice nearly absorbed by the sound of the surf, "are one of the things I love most." The moment seemed to stretch without limit. Harry did not speak at once. He looked at Tiffany for a long time, longer than usual, as if looking away would cause the scene to shatter like sea foam. He watched her hair lift in the wind, her lips part slightly, the hand still holding his. "Tiffany," he said, calling her name for the first time in that moment, his voice low, trembling faintly. She answered by stepping closer. The space between them narrowed to a single breath. "I'm here," she said. Harry drew in a deep breath. The salt air filled his lungs, expanding his chest. He lifted his free hand and rested it against her cheek. Her skin was cool from the wind, warming slowly beneath his touch. "I'm afraid," Harry said, very slowly. "Afraid that if I look too long, I won't dare look away. Afraid that if I hold on too tightly, I'll hurt you." Tiffany placed her hand over his, pressing gently. "I'm not afraid," she said. "I'm only afraid that you won't believe I'm really here." Harry swallowed. A wave broke behind them, the sound rising sharply, as if urging him forward. "I'm here," he said, "and I don't want to lose this." Tiffany smiled, not brightly, but deeply. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. The wind swept past them, carrying cool mist. "Then don't let go," she said. Harry bent down. His lips met hers, slow and certain. The kiss was not rushed, not tentative. It was there, complete, like a confirmation that needed no further words. Tiffany responded, her hands tightening, as if afraid the waves might carry the moment away. When they parted, they remained close, foreheads still touching, breaths mingling. The sea continued its motion. Waves came and went. The sun climbed higher, bathing the shore in a gentle, luminous glow. Harry looked at Tiffany, this time without hesitation. He looked as if committing the moment to memory, choosing to keep it somewhere deep within himself. "Let's keep walking," Tiffany said, smiling. Harry nodded. He tightened his grip on her hand. They walked on along the shoreline. New footprints formed in the wet sand, then vanished beneath the waves. But this time, Harry did not look down at the marks they left behind. He looked toward the light. Chapter 18. Drunk. Harry came home when the night had settled deep. The gate opened slowly beneath his hand, the hinge giving a small sound before falling silent. The porch light switched on, yellow light spilling into the yard, stretching across the tiles in uneven streaks. His steps were unsteady, his shoes met the ground out of rhythm, as though each step required an extra moment to decide where it would land. He walked straight into the garden. The chair beneath the porch roof was still there. Harry sat down, his body slumping into it, leaning back farther than necessary. The chair gave a soft creak, old wood bearing weight, then held. He did not correct his posture. He let himself tilt, like an object set down carelessly, never quite adjusted. The garden around him was still beautiful. The rose bed stood upright, stems firm, leaves thick and green. The grass had been trimmed neatly, kept from spilling into the path. The soil around each base was smooth and clean, marked by regular care. The porch light fell at an angle, glazing the leaves, catching on them in dull reflections. Everything was the same. Only one thing was missing. Harry lifted a hand to his forehead, then lowered it very slowly. His head felt heavy, a faint spinning inside, like a slow circle turning without rest. The taste of alcohol lingered in his throat, hot, dry. He swallowed, but did not stand. A light wind moved through the garden. Leaves stirred, brushing against one another with small, almost inaudible sounds. The wind chime beneath the porch roof trembled once, a thin note sounding and then stopping, as if uncertain whether it should continue. Harry turned his gaze to the corner of the yard. The four strange saplings from before were no longer saplings. Their trunks had grown taller, their leaves broader, their shapes distinct now, and on each of them, buds had formed. They were still tightly closed, the tips slightly bowed, their color not yet revealed, but their presence was unmistakable. Harry looked for a long time. He leaned forward, as if trying to see more clearly, then sank back again when dizziness caught him. His hand rested on the arm of the chair. His fingers trembled, beyond his control. He tightened his grip for a moment, then let go. Everything around him was still beautiful, and everything inside him was empty. He turned his head and looked across the yard. The small wooden table, two chairs set side by side. The space between them was not large, yet wide enough for the light to fall clearly between. There were no second footsteps, no voice calling his name from behind, only wind, leaves, and the sound of his own breathing. Harry closed his eyes for a while. When he opened them again, the light was still there. The garden remained still. The buds stayed closed, as if guarding a secret they were in no hurry to reveal. He lifted a hand and wiped his face, then let it fall to his thigh. His hand continued to shake, never fully still. He lowered his head, looking at his shoes dusted with dried soil, at the faint smear of mud along his trouser leg. A stronger gust of wind passed through. The wind chime rang again. This time the sound lasted longer, louder, a thin chain of notes striking one another before dissolving into the night. The buds quivered, their tips moving ever so slightly, as if answering. Harry opened his eyes and looked straight at them. He said nothing. He only sat there, in a garden tended with care, surrounded by beauty left intact, with his head unsteady, his hands trembling, and asterisk and emptiness spreading through his chest, slow and deep, like the night continuing on without waiting for him to catch up. Harry remained there for a long time, until the spinning in his head softened into a heavy, steady rhythm. He leaned slightly to one side, his gaze moving slowly across the familiar garden. The rose beds still lined up neatly. The soil was still carefully turned. The porch light still fell exactly where it always had, no more, no less. Everything bore the marks of patient care, of days when someone had been there, of mornings and afternoons once filled with quiet voices. Then his gaze stopped. The chair beside him. It was still there, set close to the one he sat in, the distance between the armrests just enough for two elbows to have brushed. The back of the chair leaned slightly toward him, as if someone had only recently stood up. The seat was empty now, no indentation left behind, yet the light still fell on it exactly as before, forming a solitary patch of brightness. Harry looked at the chair for a long time, longer than he had looked at the strange buds in the garden. Long enough for his neck to ache, but he did not turn away. Images surfaced without needing names. A figure sitting at an angle, a dress lifting gently in the wind, a soft laugh rising and fading. No sound actually reached his ears, yet the emptiness seemed to echo clearly. He reached his hand out to the side, without thinking. His fingers met cold air. There was no one there, no familiar warmth, only the smooth, cool surface of the wooden armrest. His fingers closed around it slowly, as though holding on to something that had just slipped beyond reach. Another gust of wind passed through. The empty chair shifted slightly, releasing a small creak. The sound stood alone in the quiet garden, sharp enough to tighten his chest. The wind chime rang with it, but this time the sound was no longer light. It stretched on, thin and sorrowful, like a sentence left unfinished. Harry lowered his head. The world tilted faintly, as if the garden itself had leaned. His hands continued to tremble. He rested his elbows on his knees, bent forward, his forehead nearing his interlaced hands. His breathing grew heavy and slow, each breath drawn longer than the last. Everything was beautiful, and that beauty made the emptiness sharper. He lifted his head once more and looked at the empty chair. The light remained unchanged. No one sat down, no one pulled it closer. No voice called his name from behind. There was only him, sitting askew in his chair. And the chair beside him, empty. The wind passed through again. The buds on the 4 strange trees quivered softly, their tips stirring as if trying to open to something in the night. But they remained closed, holding their color and shape to themselves. Harry looked at them, then back at the chair. He did not stand. He did not move the chair closer. He did not leave. He only sat there, in a carefully tended garden, beneath the porch light and the sound of the wind chime, with an empty chair beside him and a loneliness rising slowly, deep and heavy, as if it had always been there, waiting for this moment to finally be called by its proper name. Chapter 19. Wedding. The beach that day was not merely bright. It was gentle. The sunlight did not blaze or glare. It lay across the water like a thin veil of silk. Soft and patient, waves reached the shore in a slow, even rhythm, as if the ocean had learned how to breathe alongside human hearts. The wind moved across the sand carrying salt, flowers, and newly warmed light, blending into a scent that could not be named, only felt deep in the chest. Harry stood there, barefoot on the sand. The sand was warm, not burning, not cold, just enough to remind him that he was standing, fully and unmistakably. In this moment, his palms were damp with sweat, and he did not wipe them away. He let the feeling remain, as proof that he was alive inside this instant. Around him, the people he loved were not spectators but a circle quietly holding him. Anna stood with pride openly in her eyes. Gray was silent, but the faint curve of his mouth said enough. Lily clutched her bouquet with both hands, swaying with excitement, as if today were not only a wedding, but a day touched by something miraculous. Then Tiffany appeared. Nothing in Harry's life had ever slowed time the way this did. She stepped forward, and the world behind her seemed to dissolve, leaving only her moving toward him. The white dress shifted with each step. Small yellow flowers sewn into the fabric caught the sunlight, blowing and softening again with every breath of wind. Her hair lifted, fell against her shoulder, then lifted once more, as though the sea itself wanted to reach her. Harry did not breathe for several seconds. He only looked. When Tiffany stood before him, the space between them was no longer distance, but history, quiet mornings, gardens carefully tended, silent nights, times they lost one another and found their way back. He reached out his hand. Tiffany placed hers in it. In that moment, Harry no longer heard waves or wind or voices. He heard only his own heartbeat, strong and clear, unafraid. When it was his turn to speak, Harry opened his mouth and could not speak at once. Tears came before words. He laughed through a broken breath, the sound uneven, unfinished, but real. He lowered his head until his forehead nearly touched Tiffany's hand, then lifted it again, eyes red, voice trembling but steady enough to hold. "I used to think," Harry said, "that happiness was something that came and went." He swallowed and let his breath out slowly. "But when I met you," he continued, "I understood that happiness is a place you return to." His hand shook, but it did not let go. "I promise," Harry said, "to love you with everything I have." He paused, looking directly into Tiffany's eyes. "And with everything I once lost." Tears fell onto the sand. No one rushed to wipe them away. No one needed to. "I promise to care for you," he said, "not because I must, but because it is what I choose every day." His voice grew quieter. "I promise to stay." Even when the world grows silent, even when nothing is easy. Harry bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. Tiffany stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding him there for a unbroken moment, long enough for him to cry without restraint. When Tiffany spoke, she did not cry at once. Her voice was calm, as though she had carried these words with her for a very long time. "I did not choose you because you are perfect," she said. "I chose you because you are real." She touched his cheek. "I choose the quiet mornings, the gardens, the empty chairs that become filled, and the days when you do not know what to say." She smiled. "I promise to love you, not to make you stronger, but to let you be yourself." When they exchanged rings, the metal flashed briefly in the sunlight, a small but enduring blessing. When Harry slid the ring onto Tiffany's finger, he cried again. This time the tears did not break him open, they overflowed. When they kissed, the applause rose not in bursts, but in a long, rolling sound, like waves following waves. Lily let out a small cheer. Anna turned away to wipe her eyes. Gray nodded, as though something in the world had just been set back into its rightful place. Harry held Tiffany very tightly, not from fear of losing her, but because he knew this truth with certainty. He had found what he was looking for. He rested his forehead against hers and whispered, just loud enough for the two of them, "Thank you for staying." Tiffany answered softly, "I am still here." Behind them, the sea continued its rhythm. The wind continued to move. The sunlight continued to spread. And in that moment, happiness was no longer a feeling. It was the full presence of two people standing side by side, complete, unafraid, and no longer searching for anything beyond each other. Chapter 20. Blooming. Dusk settles over the shoreline very slowly. The sun sinks lower, its light no longer gold but darkening, drawing a deep orange washed with violet across the surface of the water. The sea is quiet. Waves strike the shore with more weight than they had during the day, each layer of water pressing into the sand before pulling back, leaving long, damp shadows behind. The wind moves sideways, carrying cold and the sharp scent of salt, thickening the air. Harry sits on a large rock near the water's edge. His bare feet touch the wet sand. His shoes rest to one side. His jacket is open, the wind slipping against his chest, making him shiver slightly, though he does not close it. He sits with his back curved a little forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the horizon as it slowly dissolves. In the distance, the boundary between sky and sea has blurred. Clouds and water merge into a single dark mass spreading outward. A seabird glides past, lets out a short cry, then disappears into the open space above the water. Harry bends down and picks up a stone. It is cold, smooth, slightly damp. He turns it in his palm, feeling its small weight settle into his hand. His fingers tighten slowly, then loosen, then tighten again. The stone remains still, as if it too is waiting for a decision. He stands. The sand sinks beneath his feet, leaving deep impressions. He steps closer to the waterline, where the last wave has just withdrawn, revealing darker sand beneath. He draws his arm back, takes a short breath, and throws. A dull splash sounds. Water jumps up slightly, forming a small circle. Then everything closes again. The waves continue their motion, erasing the trace at once, as if the stone had never touched the surface. Harry does not move. He watches the place where the water sealed itself, for a long time, until the final light of the sun slips completely below the horizon. The colors drain faster than he expects. The sea turns deep blue, then gray, then almost black. The wind grows colder. He turns his back on the water and walks slowly toward the path leading off the beach. By the time Harry reaches home, night has fully arrived. The porch light is on. A warm yellow glow spills into the garden, revealing the familiar rows of plants. The space is quiet, no voices, no second set of footsteps, only the wind brushing through leaves. Harry stops on the step. He looks toward the corner of the garden where 4 unfamiliar plants have grown. The light reaches them just enough to show that the flowers have opened. No longer tight buds, the petals unfold in layers. Not yet complete, but enough to reveal pale yellow at the center. The stems have grown taller, straighter, firmer. Harry steps closer. He bends down, examining each bloom. The petals are thin, gently curved, lifting toward the porch light, as if searching for a more familiar source of brightness. The wind passes, and the flowers tremble slightly. After a moment, the sound of running footsteps comes from the gate. Uncle Harry. Lily appears, holding a small cardboard box in her arms. She slows when she sees Harry standing by the flower bed, then runs closer. "I brought apple pie," she says, breathing a little fast. "My mom just baked it." She sets the box on the small table beneath the porch and opens the lid. The scent of apples and cinnamon spreads softly into the cool air. Lily turns back to the flowers. "Oh," she says, eyes widening, "they bloomed." Harry nods. He does not speak. Lily crouches very close, studying each flower. "They look like sunflowers," she says, "don't you think?" Harry follows the direction of her pointing finger. Yellow petals lifted upward, straight stems, a clear, steady posture. "Maybe," he says quietly. Lily stands and looks at him. "These flowers love sunlight the most. Uncle Harry," she says with certainty, "they always turn toward the sun." Harry does not answer at once. His hand rests on the edge of the table. His fingers tremble slightly. He tightens them for a moment, then releases. The wind moves beneath the porch roof, and the wind chime stirs. The sound is clear and then it rings out, then fades. The chair beneath the porch rocks gently. Empty, the backrest tips forward a little, then returns to its place. The porch light falls on the vacant seat, forming a clean patch of brightness. Lily follows the sound of the chime, then looks back at Harry. "Do you hear it?" she asks. "It sounds happy." Harry nods, almost imperceptibly. He looks at the sunflowers still opening, at the chair rocking softly, at the wind chime trembling faintly in the night air. His hand remains on the table. The trembling slows, though it does not stop completely. The wind passes once more. The chime rings. The chair moves just slightly. The yellow petals tremble, all of them turn toward the light. Chapter 21, Memory. As if guided by a habit embedded deep in his body, Harry sits down at the old table once again. The wooden surface has darkened with age. Fine scratches run along the grain like lines of memory that have never fully faded. Everything on the table is arranged with care. Papers stacked neatly, pens aligned side by side, a glass turned upside down on a cloth that has already dried. Morning light passes through the window, slides along the edge of the table, and settles in familiar corners, never straying. But today, something is different. Beside the painting hanging opposite the bed, the one he painted with silence and patience, there is now an additional frame. Not large, not ornate, just a photograph of sunflowers. Yellow petals spread wide, a dark center, stems rising straight. The light in the photograph falls from one side, as if the flower has turned its face toward a sun that has just slipped beyond the frame. Harry looks at the photograph for a long time. He does not step closer. He does not reach out. He simply looks from a distance that keeps every detail intact. In that moment, the room seems to hold its breath. No sound moves through it, except the faint wind outside the window. He stands. The wooden floor gives its familiar creak beneath his step. Harry leaves the room and walks down the stairs. Along the walls of the hallway, framed photographs hang in careful order, evenly spaced. Each frame holds a moment that was once fully alive. Harry and Tiffany in the garden. Tiffany sitting on the chair beneath the veranda. The two of them on the beach, sunlight spilling over their shoulders and hair. Harry walks slowly. His eyes pass over each frame. He does not linger too long on any one, yet he misses none of them. Some photographs return their moment clearly to him. He remembers the smell of the wind, the quality of the light that day. Others offer no such detail. He cannot remember how he smiled then. He only knows that the smile was real. A sense of emptiness spreads. It does not arrive all at once. It seeps outward, slowly, filling the spaces between frames, the stretches of bare wall left uncovered by photographs. It does not stab, it is quiet, and because of that, it runs deep. Harry steps into the kitchen. He opens the cabinet and takes out the coffee, pours the grounds into the filter, heats the water. Each movement is precise and automatic. Requiring no thought, hot water flows down, steam rises, carrying the familiar scent of coffee through the kitchen. He stands and waits. He does not check the clock. He does not hurry. When the Americano is ready, he carries it out to the veranda. The wind chime is still ringing. Its sound is thin and clear, notes touching and separating, repeating with each small shift of wind. It is not insistent, not broken, just steady, like a reminder that some things continue, even when no one listens all the way through. Harry stands beneath the roof and looks out at the garden. In the distance, the line of rose bushes remains straight, each plant holding its place. The stems are sturdier now, the leaves thicker and greener. Some blossoms are fully open. Others have begun to close after a long day. Morning light falls across the row in long bands, deepening the red, giving it weight. The wind passes, carrying the scent of roses softly through the air. Harry takes a sip of coffee. The bitterness spreads, familiar, neither sharp nor surprising. He leans his back against the veranda post and lets his gaze follow the roses. Then move past them to the open space beyond, where 4 sunflower plants stand. The flowers have opened more than they had the day before. Petals spread wide, bright yellow in the light. Every one of them leans in the same direction. No hesitation, no pause. Harry looks at them, and the memories surface clearly. Mornings when Tiffany stood in the garden, her white dress brushing the ground. The times she sat rocking gently in the chair, laughing softly, words that needed no reply, hands that reached for each other without reason. None of it arrives in order, yet nothing feels disjointed. The memories stand together, like the row of flowers before him. Neat, distinct, impossible to deny. The wind chime rings again. The chair beneath the veranda shifts slightly, rocking once before settling. No one sits in it, but the movement is enough to send a small tremor through the air. Harry sets his coffee down on the table. He stands there, inside a house arranged with care, among photographs hung with intention, within a garden tended patiently. Everything is in its place. Everything is clear. Only emotion resists arrangement. He lifts his gaze toward the sunflower photograph, visible through the stairwell window. Light touches the petals in the image, making the yellow glow more brightly. The wind chime continues to ring. The roses remain aligned. The sunflowers keep turning toward the light. And Harry stands where he is, allowing every memory to surface fully. He does not turn away. He does not name them. He does not try to send them off. Chapter 22. Don't turn away. Dusk descends very slowly. The last light of day slides along the edge of the veranda and spills into the garden in thin, slanted bands. The soil, freshly turned, still holds its dark color, its damp scent rising softly into the air and mingling with the fragrance of young rose bushes standing straight in their rows. The wind passes through, not strong, just enough to stir the leaves, just enough to set the wind chime beneath the eaves ringing in delicate, clear, even tones. Harry and Tiffany sit beside each other on the familiar wooden chair. The wood has grown smooth with time. The armrests cool beneath their palms. Tiffany leans back slightly, her eyes resting on the garden. The hem of her dress brushes the edge of the seat, lifting faintly with each breath of wind. Harry sits more upright, his hands on his thighs, his gaze following the rose beds before settling on the sky as its color begins to shift. The wind chime sounds again. The note touches the air, then fades, leaving behind a very thin silence. Harry rises and steps inside. The door opens quietly, then closes. When he returns, he is holding a jacket. He says nothing. He comes up behind Tiffany and drapes it over her shoulders, pulling it into place so the wind cannot reach her neck. His hand rests briefly on her shoulder, pauses for a single heartbeat, then withdraws. "It's getting colder," he says. Tiffany tilts her head, smiling as she holds the edge of the jacket. "Yes," she replies, "evening wind always makes people think too much." They fall silent for a while. Somewhere, there is a faint sound of soil shifting, perhaps a dry branch giving way. The scent of freshly turned earth grows stronger as the wind changes direction. The roses remain still, some buds tightly closed, others already open, their petals thick and steady. Tiffany turns slightly to look at Harry. The light of the setting sun touches his face, softening its lines. If one day, she says slowly, as if choosing each word, you couldn't see me anymore, what would you do? Harry does not answer at once. He looks out at the garden, at the straight rows of flowers, at the light retreating from the ground. The wind chime rings again. It's no longer this time. I don't know, he says. Tiffany frowns, not in anger, only with quiet concern. She tilts her head a little more. You don't know, she repeats. Harry turns to face her. His eyes do not avoid hers, but something in them has slowed, grown deeper. I just don't know how to answer, he says, because when I think about that, I don't feel steady anymore. Tiffany says nothing. She looks down at her hand resting on her lap, then at Harry's hand close beside it, not yet touching. The wind moves through again, the chime ringing softly, evenly. If it were me, she says, her voice lower, I would be very sad. Harry reaches out and touches her hand. At first it is barely a touch, only the tips of their fingers meeting. Then he closes his hand around hers, firmer. You are my light, Tiffany, he says. The words fall quietly, but they do not disappear. They remain there, between the sound of the chime and the scent of earth, between the fading sunset and the tended garden. Tiffany turns fully toward him. Her eyes shine, not with tears, but with the last light left in the day. Then, she says, don't turn away. Harry nods. He tightens his grip on her hand and draws closer. Their shoulders touch. The jacket slips slightly, settling over them both. The wind chime rings once more. This time the sound lingers, blending with the wind through the leaves and the scent of freshly turned soil. The light continues to fade, yet the garden remains clear, each row of roses upright, each patch of earth smooth, as if holding on to everything that has just been said. Harry and Tiffany sit there without speaking, simply together, beneath the veranda, as the day slowly closes. Chapter 23. Opposite. Memories did not break apart in any order. They arrived in fragments, scattered and jagged, cutting into Harry even when he made no effort to remember. After his shift ended, he stepped out of the bar as he did every other night. The yellow lights behind him dimmed, the door closed, and the street opened ahead, long and familiar enough that his feet found the way without consulting his thoughts. He passed through each place, the street corner where Tiffany used to wait for him after work. Her back against the cold wall, hands tucked into her coat pockets, smiling when he came out later than planned. The small cafe at the end of the block where they once sat by the window. A single cup of coffee between them, steam clouding the glass. The narrow bridge over the canal where the wind always blew harder than elsewhere. Where Tiffany once stopped, turned toward him, and said something too soft for him to hear, leaving him only the memory of how strangely bright her eyes were in that moment. Harry walked past everything. He did not stop. He did not reach out. He did not speak her name. Everything remained where it had always been. Only the person was gone. He walked like an ordinary man. His pace was unhurried, his steps steady. Nothing about him invited attention. To anyone passing by, he was just another man heading home late, indistinguishable from the hundreds of others moving through the night. Inside him, however, the fragments collided quietly, forming fractures that made no sound. There were no words precise enough to name this pain. It was not sharp, not loud. It was a prolonged tenderness of loss, slow and deep, seeping into the smallest hollows and making each breath slightly heavier than the last. Harry reached home long after night had settled. The porch light turned on, spilling warm yellow across the garden. The quiet was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat in his chest. He opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him. The house received him with perfect silence. He stood there for a moment, then stepped back outside into the garden. The sunflowers were in full bloom. Their petals were fully open, glowing gold beneath the porch light. Their centers had darkened, steady and calm, tall and upright. They all faced the same direction, as though still searching for the familiar light, even though the sun had long since gone. The wind passed through, their petals brushing against one another, producing sounds so faint they were nearly imperceptible. Harry stopped. He looked at them for a long time, long enough for his thoughts to drain away completely. Then, very slowly, he lowered himself into the chair beneath the porch. His shoulders sagged, his hands fell open onto his thighs. And then everything broke. Not all at once, and not with a cry. Just a single sob slipped out before he could stop it. Then another. His breathing fractured, his chest tightened, as if an unseen hand had closed around it. Tears welled up, hot and saline, falling onto his hands in the wooden floor. Unchecked. Harry bent forward, his forehead nearly touching his knees. The sound of his sobbing filled the stillness of the night. Painfully clear. No one heard it. No one stepped out of the house. No one placed a hand on his shoulder and told him it would be all right. There was only him and the sunflowers blooming in the garden. He lifted his hands to cover his face, but the tears slipped through his fingers. His shoulders shook in small, uneven rhythms. Above him, the wind chimes stirred softly, their thin, lingering notes trembling like a farewell never spoken aloud. Harry raised his head, his vision blurred with tears, yet the sunflowers remained painfully sharp. They stood there, devastatingly beautiful, as though holding all the words he never had the chance to say and all the moments he never got to share. His lips trembled, his voice came out rough and barely audible, dissolving into the air as soon as it formed. I wish Tiffany could see them. The words fell into the garden. Nothing answered. The wind moved through again. The chimes rang once more, and the sunflowers swayed gently beneath the light, still turned toward a brightness that no longer existed. Harry remained seated. The tears gradually stopped, but the pain did not. It stayed, quiet and deep within his chest, something no longer possible to bury, not because he was weak, but because he had loved too truthfully. In that moment, his grief became beautiful in a merciless way, because it existed beside remembered happiness, not obscuring it, not erasing it, simply standing next to it in silence, like two inseparable truths of a life that had once loved without restraint. Chapter 24. Follow the sunshine. That afternoon, the light fell across the porch in a way that felt unfamiliar. It was no longer radiant as it had been in the morning, yet it had not fully dimmed into dusk. The sunlight slanted thin and pale, skimming the edge of the roof, spilling across the wooden floorboards before stopping at the boundary between light and shadow. The wind moved slowly, carrying the scent of damp soil from the recently watered garden, the smell of young leaves, and the faint fragrance of flowers that had not yet fully opened. The wind chimes beneath the eaves stirred softly, their sound rising and fading again like a long exhale from the house itself. Tiffany sat by the porch. She sat very still, as though even the smallest movement might cause her shape to dissolve into the air. Her face looked worn, its features familiar yet thinned, faded, like a photograph slowly drained of color by light. Her eyes were deep and gentle, but tired. Her hair fell over her shoulders, no longer glossy as it once had been. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers loosely interlaced, neither gripping nor letting go. Harry stood a few steps away, just in front of the porch. He did not move closer. He did not take the chair across from her. The distance between them was slight, yet impossible to cross, like an invisible boundary separating the present from something that no longer existed on the same plane of reality. You know, Tiffany said, her voice so light the wind could have carried it away at any moment. I always loved watching you in this house. Harry remained still. A quiet ache touched his chest. The way you loved it, she continued, her gaze drifting slowly across the porch. The way you hung every picture straight, lined up every book, as if everything deserved to be in exactly the right place. The wind chimes rang once, thin and clear. In the garden, Tiffany said, her eyes settling on the neat rows of roses in the distance. The way you bend down to the soil, the way you touch each plant, so gently, as if you were touching something fragile. The wind passed through, lifting the hem of her dress. Light as mist. Don't forget to love those things, she said, a soft, sorrowful smile forming at the corner of her mouth, because that is how you loved me. Harry felt his throat tighten. The flowers, Tiffany went on, her voice slower now. They always turn toward the light, even when they are tired, even when the wind is strong, even when the sky changes. She turned back to him, her eyes deep and warm. Just like how I tried to guide you through the loneliness of your life. At that moment, the wind shifted. The light on the porch trembled. Tiffany's outline began to fade at the edges, like watercolor bleeding across wet paper. Her features softened and blurred, not suddenly, but slowly, enough for Harry to understand what was happening, and not enough for him to stop it. She looked at him one last time. Her gaze was full of love, without reproach, without pleading. Then the image dissolved. The chair beneath the porch stood empty. No one sat there, only the slanted light remained, the wind passing through the open space, and the wind chimes ringing longer now, more unsteady. Harry turned back very slowly. He seemed to wait for her to still be there, if only for one more heartbeat, but the porch was empty. The absence was so clear that even the light falling into it felt alone. A single tear slid down his face. It did not fall quickly or in haste. It traced his cheek, carrying with it the memory of quiet mornings, afternoons spent sitting side by side, words that never needed to be spoken aloud. He did not wipe it away. He let it fall, as a form of acceptance. Then, from a distance, came the sound of bare feet running across the ground. Uncle Harry. Lily appeared at the gate, her dress fluttering with each step, her hair loose, sunlight breaking through the trees and landing directly on her small face. Her smile was bright and clear, so radiant it seemed to shift the color of the air around her. Harry turned toward the sound of her voice. The light reached his eyes, warm and real. Lily stopped at the porch, breathing hard, then laughed. "The garden is so beautiful," she said. "The sunflowers are all in bloom." Harry followed the direction of her pointing hand. The sunflowers stood tall, rising even higher than the roses behind them. Their petals were fully open, a vivid gold, catching the last light of the day. All of them faced the same direction, toward where the light still lingered, where the sun hovered low in the sky. He smiled. The smile did not erase the pain, but it set it gently into its proper place. "I'll follow the sunlight," Harry said, his voice low and steady. "Will you take care of the plants for me?" Lily tilted her head, her eyes whitening. "Where are you going?" Harry looked beyond the garden, past the fence, past the familiar roads, toward the edge of the sky where the light still gathered. "To wherever the sun rises," he said. "I'll go to look for inspiration." Lily nodded vigorously. "I'll water them every day," she said. "I promise." Harry bent down and placed his hand on Lily's head, stroking it gently. His hand was warm and steady. The wind passed through, the chimes rang out, clear and lingering. The sunflowers swayed lightly, their petals catching the light and brightening once more. Harry stood there, between memory and the present, between loss and hope, looking toward the light. And this time, he stepped forward, not to leave anything behind, but to carry with him everything he had ever learned.